A man who survived wars couldn't survive the system. A father who saved lives overseas watched everything fall apart at home. Cole Barrett lost his career, his reputation, and nearly his hope, all because he trusted the wrong person. Now the clock is running out on his little girl, and the only thing standing between Maisie and silence forever is a stranger who walks through his door on the worst night of the year. This is the story of what a father does when the world leaves him with nothing, and how far he'll go when it tries to take his daughter too. If this kind of story moves you, the kind that reminds you what really matters, subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss what's coming next. These are the stories we don't hear enough. Drop a like if you're already in, and leave a comment telling us what city and country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The rain came sideways that Thursday night. Not the soft Boston drizzle that tourists photograph against old brick and gas lamps, but the kind of rain that means something, the kind that arrives with wind and cold, and makes people question every decision that brought them to this particular moment on this particular street. Kind that soaks through a coat in 30 seconds flat and leaves puddles deep enough to swallow a shoe. Cole Barrett stood behind the bar at Anchor and Rye and watched the water streak down the front window in long diagonal lines, distorting the streetlights outside into something that looked vaguely like a painting. A bad one. The kind hanging in a hospital waiting room where nobody actually looks at it. He was drying a pint glass he'd already dried twice. The bar was nearly empty. Thursday nights in October didn't pull crowds, especially not with weather like this. There was an older couple in the corner booth, nursing their second round of Guinness without speaking to each other, which either meant they'd been married a very long time or they'd had an argument in the car. There was a guy at the far end of the bar in a Patriots hoodie watching highlights on the mounted television with the focused intensity of someone who had nowhere else to be. And there was the bartender himself, 37 years old, 6'1", a scar running along his left jaw that he never bothered to explain to anyone, wiping down a clean glass in a bar he didn't own, in a life that had stopped feeling like his somewhere along the way. Cole set the glass down, picked up another one. He didn't love this job. He didn't hate it either. It paid, it kept him moving, and the night shift meant his neighbor Mrs. Paulson could stay with Maisie from 4 until close, without it being a hardship for either of them. That was the math. That was most of his life now, a series of calculations designed to keep things from getting worse. He was thinking about Maisie when the door opened. The woman who came through it was trying to hold an umbrella that the wind had already beaten half inside out, and she wasn't winning. She gave up on it about 3 feet into the doorway, collapsed it with 2 sharp movements, and shook water off her coat with the brisk efficiency of someone who made decisions fast and didn't dwell on them. She looked around the bar once, a quick, assessing scan that Cole recognized without knowing why, and walked straight to the bar. Not a booth, not a table in the corner, the bar. She sat down 2 stools from the far end, set her bag on the stools beside her, and pushed wet hair back from her forehead. "Bourbon," she said. "Neat. Whatever you have that isn't terrible. I've got Woodford and Elijah Craig." Elijah Craig. Cole poured 2 fingers and set it in front of her. She picked it up immediately, which meant she wasn't here to socialize. He moved back down the bar and gave her space, which was all most people really wanted at 11 o'clock on a rainy Thursday, a drink, and the right to be left alone with whatever was happening inside their head. He glanced at her once while rinsing a glass. Late 20s, early 30s maybe. Well-dressed in the way that looked effortless but wasn't. Coat she'd hung on the stool was expensive. He didn't know brands, but he knew quality, and that coat was quality. She had the posture of someone used to being in charge of rooms, but right now she looked like someone who had just absorbed information she hadn't finished processing. There was a tension in the way. She held the glass fingertips only, slight white at the knuckles that he recognized from a different life, in different places, around people who had just received bad news and hadn't decided what to do about it yet. She finished the bourbon in 2 measured sips. Another one. Cole poured it without comment. She sat with the second glass but didn't drink it right away. Just held it. Outside, the rain doubled down on the windows. A couple in the corner called for their check. The guy in the Patriots hoodie let out a short, unhappy sound at whatever was happening on the screen. "You're not going to ask," she said. Cole looked up. "Ask what? What's wrong?" "Most bartenders ask." "Most bartenders are lonely," he said. "I'm just working." She looked at him, then actually looked, the way people rarely do in bars, and something in her expression shifted slightly. Not warmer, exactly. More like she'd recalibrated something. How long have you been here, she asked. At this bar? About 14 months. That's not what I meant. He set down the rag. 2 years, he said. Give or take. She nodded slowly, like that confirmed something she'd been thinking. You don't seem like a bartender, funny, Cole said. You don't seem like someone who sits at bars alone. The corner of her mouth moved, almost a smile. Not quite. Elena Whitlock, she said. She didn't extend her hand, just offered the name like a card on a table. Cole Barrett. He drank. He worked. The couple in the corner left, pulling coats on and arguing quietly about something to do with parking. The rain didn't let up. It was another 10 minutes before Elena spoke again, and when she did, she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the bourbon. Has anyone ever taken something from you, she said, that they had no right to take? Something you built. Something you worked for. And then they just walked away with it. Like it was theirs. Cole was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said. They have, she looked up. What did you do, she asked. He picked up another glass. Survived it, he said. Kept going. Took care of what mattered. That's it? That's a lot more than it sounds. She studied him. The bar had gone quiet around them, just the rain and the low music from the speaker above the register. Something slow and indistinct. The guy in the hoodie had paid his tab and left without Cole noticing. I run a company, Elena said, medical technology. We've spent 4 years developing a diagnostic system that could genuinely change how early-stage diseases get caught. Not theoretical. Real. Clinical trials starting next year. She said it without pride, stated it. The way people describe things they've lived inside so long, they forget other people find them impressive. Sounds like important work, Cole said. It is. She turned the glass in her hands. My CFO has been with me since before we had a real office. Since we were operating out of a converted warehouse in Cambridge with 12 people and a lease we couldn't actually afford. She paused. Victor Dane. The name landed the way names do when someone says them carefully with the weight of what they actually mean sitting underneath. What did he do? Cole asked. Elena looked at him steadily. I found documents tonight. Financial transfers I didn't authorize. Board communications that went around me. He's been quietly building a coalition, 3 board members, possibly my legal counsel, for a structured transfer of executive authority. He's planning to remove me from my own company. She said it flatly, without drama. But her jaw was tight. He's been planning it for months. While I was in the office 12 hours a day, while I was in meetings with the FDA, while I was trying to make this thing actually work, he was doing this. Cole was quiet. I know how that sounds, she said. Corporate problem. Rich people fighting over a company. That's not what I was thinking. What were you thinking? He looked at her. I was thinking that you trusted him. Something crossed her face, quick and unguarded, and then gone. Yes, she said. I did. Cole refilled her glass without being asked. The worst part, she said, after a moment, isn't the money, or the power, or whatever word people want to use for it. The worst part is that I don't know how far it goes. Whether it's just Victor, or whether the people I work with every day, people I've had dinner with, people I've helped when they needed it, whether they're all part of it. She shook her head. When you can't trust the people around you, you start questioning everything. Every conversation. Every decision. It's exhausting. Cole knew that particular exhaustion. He'd lived inside it for the better part of 3 years. My name, he said, and he wasn't entirely sure why he was saying it. It used to mean something in a different context. I was a doctor-physician's assistant, technically, but I ran a clinic, worked with combat trauma patients, guys coming back from places that leave marks. I was good at it. He paused, picked his words. A colleague of mine, someone I'd worked alongside for 4 years, got into trouble. Insurance fraud, prescription irregularities. He needed someone to put the blame on. I was convenient. He set the glass down. By the time I understood what was happening, my license was under review. My name was in 3 separate complaint filings, and everyone who could have helped me had already decided it was easier to believe the story than to ask questions. Elena was watching him carefully. How long ago? She asked. 3 years. Did you fight it? Every way I knew how. He met her eyes. Didn't matter. The damage was already done. You can win the legal argument and still lose everything else. The rain shifted a heavier band passing through, rattling the windows. I'm sorry, Elena said, and she sounded like she meant it, not in the polite way people say things, but in the way that comes from understanding something from the inside. I've got a daughter, Cole said. 7 years old. Maisie. He didn't usually say her name to strangers, but it came out. She's got a degenerative nerve condition, auditory. She's been losing her hearing gradually, but consistently. There's a procedure experimental that could stop it and possibly reverse some of the damage. But it's not covered. It's not accessible to most people. And I've spent the better part of a year trying to figure out how to get her into a trial program that has a 2-year wait list. He said it simply. He had learned, in the years since the diagnosis, that there was no useful way to say it with feeling. Feeling didn't help. Elena didn't say she was sorry again. She didn't say anything right away. She just sat with it. "What's the procedure?" she asked. He told her. The name of the program, the institution running the trials, the specialist at the head of it. He'd memorized these things the way soldiers memorize exit routes, because knowing them was the only thing that made the situation feel less like standing at the edge of something with no way back. Elena's expression changed while he spoke, not dramatically, but her eyes sharpened. "I know that program," she said. Cole looked at her. "Dr. Anita Rowe," Elena said. "I've met her. Twice. We spoke at a research conference in D.C. last spring." She paused, almost to herself. "She's extraordinary." The bar was very quiet. Cole didn't let himself think anything yet. He'd spent too many months learning not to let hope get ahead of facts. "She's also someone I could call," Elena said, and she looked at him directly when she said it. No softening, no performance. Just the statement. He held her gaze. "That's a significant thing to say to someone you met 40 minutes ago." "I know that. What would you want in return?" She didn't look offended by the question. "I need someone I can trust. Someone who knows how to watch a room and read it. Someone who isn't connected to my company, doesn't owe anything to anyone in it, and can't be bought." She paused. "I don't need a bodyguard. I need someone who understands what it means when people behave like they're afraid of something they're not admitting to." Cole was quiet for a long moment. Outside, lightning flickered somewhere over the harbor. "You don't know me," he said. "No," she agreed, "but I'm a reasonable judge of people. The main reason I survived building a company from nothing." She reached into her bag and laid a card on the bar. Plain, heavy stock, just her name and a number. "Think about it. If you want to talk tomorrow, call before noon." She finished her drink, stewed, pulled on the expensive coat. "For what it's worth," she said, picking up the collapsed umbrella, "what happened to you? Sounds like it was someone else's cowardice. Not your fault." Cole didn't answer. She walked to the door, pushed it open, and stepped out into the rain. He stood at the bar for a long moment after she left, listening to the storm. He got home at 2:15. Mrs. Paulson had left the small lamp on in the living room, the way she always did. The apartment was warm and smelled faintly of the mac and cheese Maisie had apparently lobbied for at dinner. He checked on her on his way to the kitchen, pushed the door open slowly so the hinge didn't creak, which it always did anyway, and stood in the doorway long enough to watch her breathe. Maisie slept the way she'd slept since she was a baby on her side, one hand tucked under her cheek, completely still. She had his dark hair in her mother's mouth and an expression in sleep that looked like pure, unworried rest, which was a thing Cole envied deeply and tried not to examine too closely. Closed the door softly. In the kitchen, he poured himself a glass of water and stood at the counter and looked at the bills held to the refrigerator by a magnet shaped like a lobster Maisie had picked it out at a tourist shop in Faneuil Hall the previous summer. Delighted by it in the way only 7-year-olds are delighted by things that don't make any practical sense. He pulled the card from his shirt pocket. Elena Whitlock. A phone number, no company name, no title, just the name. He set it on the counter next to the lobster magnet. He thought about Maisie sitting in the audiologist's office 6 weeks ago, coloring a worksheet about ocean animals while the doctor delivered the latest test results to Cole in language calibrated to be clear without being brutal, progressing at the lower end of their projections. Not rapidly, but steadily. They should plan accordingly. Plan accordingly. He thought about Elena's voice when she said, "I know that program." Particular steadiness of it, like someone stating a fact, not making a promise. He thought about the woman in that bar and the way she'd watched him not with pity, which he'd learned to spot instantly and which he had no patience for, but with the particular attention of someone who was gathering information, because information mattered. He thought about Victor Dane. He thought about Dr. Lewis Harmon, who had sat across from Cole in a conference room 3 years ago and explained with genuine apparent regret that the situation had become untenable and that they'd have to let Cole go while the licensing review was pending, and who had known, Cole would later understand, exactly what had been done and by whom, and had made his calculation accordingly. Picked up the card. He set it down again. He turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. In the morning, Maisie was up before him. This was normal. She had a clock in her room, and she'd learned to use it, and she treated 7 o'clock like a starting pistol. Cole heard her before he saw her, the soft thud of feet on the hardwood, the refrigerator opening, the particular sound of the cereal cabinet, which stuck and required a specific technique she had mastered, and he had not. He found her at the kitchen table with a bowl of Cheerios and a library book about deep-sea fish, wearing pajamas with small yellow stars on them. "Morning," she said without looking up. "Morning, Bug." He started the coffee, stood at the counter and watched her read while the machine worked through its slow ritual. Maisie had a hearing aid now just in the left ear, where the loss was more advanced, a small beige device that she wore without complaint and without drama, because that was Maisie. She'd cried once, when they first got it, sitting in the car outside the audiologist's office. Just for a minute. Then she'd looked at Cole and said, "Does it make me look like a robot?" And he'd said, "A very cool robot." And she'd nodded seriously and said, "Okay." And that had been the last time either of them had cried about the hearing aid. She was 7 years old, and she had more composure than most adults he'd known. "Dad," she said, still looking at her book. "Yeah. Did you know anglerfish live so deep that there's no light at all? Like zero. Complete dark. I didn't know that. How do they see?" "They don't, mostly. The females have a light on their heads. Like a built-in flashlight." She looked up at him. "That's amazing. It really is." She went back to her book. Cole poured his coffee. The card was still on the counter. He'd moved it at some point in the half-awake drift. Before sleep, he'd moved it to the side, under the edge of the fruit bowl, as if the distance would clarify something. It hadn't. He drank his coffee and thought about the phone call he wasn't sure he was going to make. He looked at his daughter. She was tracing a picture of an anglerfish with one finger, lips moving slightly as she read the caption underneath. Cole picked up the card. He picked up his phone. He dialed before the second cup of coffee, which he always told himself was too early to make major decisions, and which he apparently did not believe. It rang 3 times. "I wondered if you'd call," Elena said. Her voice was alert, already working. No trace of the rain or the bourbon or the careful honesty of the night before, or rather, all of that was still there. Underneath, but she'd put the professional version back on top of it. He understood that instinct completely. "I have questions," Cole said. "I'd expect that," she said. "Come to my office. 11 o'clock. "I haven't said yes to anything, I know," she said. "Come anyway." He looked across the kitchen at Maisie, who had found a picture of a bioluminescent jellyfish, and was holding the book up to show him, eyes bright with the specific joy of a child who has discovered something extraordinary about the world. 11, he said. He hung up. The Whitlock Medical Technologies building sat on the edge of the Seaport District, all glass and clean lines, the kind of architecture that announces itself without apology. Cole arrived at 10:55 in a jacket that wasn't quite right for the building, and shoes he'd shined the night before sent out of some reflex from a previous life when appearance was part of the job and sloppiness got people killed. He gave his name at the front desk. The receptionist, young, efficient, already reaching for the phone, made a call that lasted under 10 seconds. "Ms. Whitlock's assistant will be right down." The lobby was the kind of space designed to communicate something about the people who worked there. High ceilings, natural light, a wall installation made of interlocking white panels that Cole guessed was supposed to suggest either cellular structure or neural pathways, depending on how much you'd had to drink. There were framed photographs of children, clinical settings, medical equipment, small faces, looking at cameras with the particular expression of kids who don't quite understand why adults keep taking their picture. Real children, not stock photos. He could tell the difference. He was still looking at them when a woman in her mid-40s appeared from the elevator compact, brisk, wearing the expression of someone who managed 16 things simultaneously and found incompetence physically painful. "Mr. Barrett, I'm Diane, Miss Whitlock's executive assistant. She's ready for you." He followed her into an elevator that smelled like new carpet and up to the 14th floor, where the hallway opened into a corner office that was large without being ostentatious. No artwork meant to impress. Functional furniture. 3 monitors on the desk, a whiteboard covered in what looked like process diagrams, and a view of the harbor that Elena was not looking at when Cole walked in, because she was standing at the whiteboard, reading, something with the focused attention of a person who doesn't stop working when someone enters a room. She turned when she heard the door. "You came," she said. I said I would. People say things at 11 o'clock at night in bars that they don't necessarily mean in the morning. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Sit down." He sat. She stayed standing, which told him something. She wasn't nervous, she was in thinking mode, which for her apparently meant staying on her feet. "I want to show you something before we talk about what I need," she said. She moved to one of the monitors and turned it toward him. On the screen was a document, legal formatting, case number at the top, the name of the Pennsylvania State Medical Board in the header. Cole's own name 3 lines down. He went still. "The original complaint," Elena said. "Filed by Dr. Marcus Webb, March 3 years ago. I had someone pull the full licensing review record last night after I got home." She turned another monitor. "This is Webb's DEA registration audit from the same period. And this," she pulled up a third document, "is an internal hospital communication from 4 months before your review began, flagging Webb for irregularities in controlled substance prescription patterns." Cole looked at the dates, looked at the sequence. "They knew about Webb before they came after me," he said. "The hospital's compliance office opened a quiet review of Webb in November. Your licensing complaint was filed the following March. The hospital's Webb file was officially closed, marked inconclusive, the same week your review hearing was scheduled." She let that sit. Someone made a decision about which problem was more convenient to solve. Cole's jaw was tight. He'd suspected this had turned it over in his mind for 3 years, in the way you turn over something you can't prove and can't put down, but seeing it laid out in documents was different from suspecting it. "Why did you do this?" he asked. "Because I needed to know who I was dealing with," she said. It wasn't unkind, just direct. "And because you deserved to see it." She sat down across from him. "I'm going to file a formal complaint with the board on your behalf, with a full evidentiary package, requesting review of the original case. I have a lawyer who specializes in exactly this kind of professional licensing dispute. She's good. I've also already sent a preliminary message to Dr. Anita Rowe about a consult call next week." She paused. "I'm not doing this as leverage. I want to be clear about that. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do and because I can. What I need from you is separate." Cole looked at her for a long moment. "What exactly do you need?" Elena leaned back in her chair. The harbor glittered behind her through the glass. "Victor Dane has been with me for 6 years. He came in as CFO when we were still pre-revenue, before the first serious round of funding. Smart, patient, genuinely good at the financial architecture of a startup. I trusted him with things I didn't trust anyone else with. She wasn't performing regret, it came through clean, the way real things do. What I found last night wasn't an accident. He's been building this for at least 18 months. Structured financial transfers to accounts I'm not a signatory on. Board communications through personal email to avoid company records. He's got at least 3 of the 7 board members. I think it's Harrison, Pack, and Drummond, but I can't confirm it without better information." "And your legal counsel?" She hesitated. "Just slightly. Rebecca Sloan. She's been my general counsel for 4 years. If Victor has her, he has the legal infrastructure to make this clean. A board majority plus legal cover means they can remove me without a court fight." She looked at Cole. "I can't go to the board. If 3 of them are compromised, I'm tipping my hand. Can't go to my legal team for obvious reasons. And I can't hire a private investigator without it getting back to Victor within a week. This company is not large enough for secrets. So you want me to do what, exactly? Come into the company. Officially, you're my personal driver and logistics coordinator. I travel between 3 offices, and I have external meetings that require ground transportation. Anyway, it's not unusual." Unofficially, she met his eyes steadily. "I want your read on people. I want to know what you see that I'm too close to see. And I want to know if there's a way to get me documented evidence of what Victor is doing before he moves." Cole looked at the monitors. Back at her. "You've thought about this a lot since last night. I think fast when I'm angry. How angry are you?" She considered the question seriously. "Controlled angry," she said. The other kind doesn't help. He understood that distinction completely. "I need a few things," he said. "If I'm going to do this right. Tell me. I need access to common areas. Lobbies, conference room floors, anywhere people gather between meetings. I'm not going through personal files or private communications without your written authorization. I need that on record before anything else." "Already drafted," she said, and slid a folder across the desk. "My personal attorney prepared it this morning. Read it. He read it. It was specific and it was clean. He signed it. Second thing, he said, I work my own way. I don't report every observation in real time. When I have something solid, I'll bring it to you. Not theories, evidence. Agreed. Third thing, Maisie is always the priority. If something comes up with her, I'm gone. No discussion. Of course, Elena said, and she said it without the pause. Some people put before of course when they don't entirely mean it. Cole folded his copy of the authorization and put it in his jacket pocket. When do I start? Tomorrow morning, she said, 7:30. He nodded. Stude was halfway to the door when she spoke again. Cole. He turned. Victor is good at this. He's been doing it quietly for a long time. Don't underestimate how patient he is. I've dealt with patient, Cole said. Just means they think they have time. He started the way he always started anything that mattered, by watching. The first 3 days, Cole drove Elena between her meetings, sat in lobbies, stood in hallways, and said very little. He wore the jacket and the expression of a man paid to wait, which was an effective disguise in environments where visible staff were ignored, the way furniture is ignored. People stopped seeing you, and when people stopped seeing you, they started behaving like themselves. He began building a mental map. The executive floor operated on rhythms: who got coffee at what time, who took the stairs versus the elevator, who lingered near certain offices, whose conversations dropped in volume when he passed. Most of it was noise. Human beings in offices behave strangely under normal circumstances, and you had to learn the baseline before you could read a deviation. Victor Dane established his own baseline within 48 hours. Tall, well-built, silver at the temples in a way that read as distinguished rather than aged. He moved through the office with the comfortable authority of a man who believed the outcome of things was already settled. He was pleasant, genuinely pleasant. Not performed, which was, Cole thought, more dangerous than an obviously difficult person. People who were naturally warm were harder to read because the warmth was real, even when the intentions weren't. Victor acknowledged Cole the first time they crossed paths near the elevator bank. New face, he said not unkindly. Cole Barrett. Miss Whitlock's driver, Victor Dane. He shook hands. Firm grip, brief. How long have you been with Elena? Just started, Cole said. Good. She works hard. She needs reliable people around her. He said it warmly, paternally almost, the way someone says something when they've already decided the person they're talking about is no longer a concern. Cole smiled back and said nothing further. He began logging what he saw in a small notebook he kept in his jacket, not names and accusations, just behaviors. Timing, patterns. The 3 board members Elena had mentioned, Harrison, Pack, and Drummond, were all remote. But Victor had in-office interactions with 2 senior directors Cole identified as probable intermediaries. On Tuesday, one of those directors, a man named Greaves, mid-50s, a particular way of leaving rooms faster than he arrived, spent 22 minutes in Victor's office with the door closed. Victor's door was almost never closed. On Thursday, Greaves sent an email from his phone while standing in the lobby, apparently unaware that Cole was 8 feet away behind a structural column, waiting for a courier. Greaves's expression while sending the email was the expression of a man completing a task he was relieved to have finished. Small things. But small things were how the picture got built. It was Rebecca Sloan who surprised him. He'd expected, based on Elena's description, to see either the smooth performance of someone covering their tracks or the barely contained guilt of someone doing something they hated. What he saw instead was neither. Rebecca Sloan moved through the building with the careful, measured control of someone managing an enormous amount of internal pressure. She was precise in meetings he sat in on too, that Elena included him in as a logistics presence and unfailingly professional. But there were moments, small and quick, where something else showed through. A particular stillness when Victor entered a room she was already in. The way her hands would settle on the table and not move when his name came up. Not fear of Victor's authority. Something more specific than that. More personal. Cole had seen that particular stillness before, in people carrying something they couldn't put down. He mentioned none of this to Elena yet. On Friday of the first week, Elena had a late external meeting, and Cole drove her back to the Seaport office at close to 7. The building was mostly empty. She was going back up to finish something before the weekend, and he'd told her he would wait, which she'd told him wasn't necessary, which they both understood was not actually the question. While he waited in the lobby, he took the stairs to the 12th floor where the executive suite was housed, and found the common area quiet. A security guard he'd gotten used to made his standard pass at 1:15, and then didn't come back for the better part of an hour, which Cole had already noted as the routine. Victor Dane's office was on the corner of the 12th floor, east side. Cole stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the building settle around him. Then he tried the handle. The door was unlocked. He went in. He wasn't there to search the room in any elaborate way. He had no intention of touching files he wasn't cleared to touch, and anyway what he was looking for wasn't paper. It was the kind of thing people left out when they felt secure: a secondary monitor not logged off, a physical planner left open to the wrong page, printout left face up on a surface near the window because the person working there had been interrupted and stepped out, expecting to return. There was a printout. Cole read it in 30 seconds without picking it up. It was a technical summary dense, formatted like an internal review document, with a date stamp from 2 months ago. The language was specialized, but he could follow enough of it. It described a systematic error in the AI diagnostic system's classification algorithm, a flaw that produced false negative results in approximately 8 to 12% of cases, specifically in early-stage presentations of 3 disease categories. The document had 2 signatures at the bottom. One was a name he didn't recognize. The other was Victor Dane's. Cole stood very still. This was not a corporate power struggle. Victor hadn't just been building a takeover. He'd been sitting on evidence of a dangerous flaw in a medical device that was months from clinical trials. A device that Elena believed was safe. A device that, if it moved forward with this flaw uncorrected, would produce wrong results for real patients, the kind of wrong results that delayed treatment, that let things progress while people believed they were clear. Cole took his phone out, photographed the document from 3 angles, the phone away. Then he heard movement in the outer office. He had maybe 4 seconds. He moved to the side wall, away from the direct sight line of the doorway, and stayed completely still in the way the Navy had taught him to stay still, which was not the tense, held breath stillness of someone trying not to be seen, but the easy, practiced stillness of someone who has made themselves part of the background. Victor Dane walked in. He went to his desk and sat, opened his laptop, began typing. Cole watched through the gap in the half-open interior door, not moving, measuring the distance to the main office door 12 feet. Clear path, no obstacles. Victor stopped typing. He sat back in his chair slowly, looked at the printout on the side table. Then he looked directly at the interior door. "I know someone's in there," he said. His voice was calm. Unsettlingly calm, the way very controlled people are calm when they've already decided what they're going to do. "You can come out, or I call security, and this becomes something uglier than it needs to be." Cole walked out. Victor looked at him without visible surprise. "Elena's driver. That's right. What are you doing in my office?" "Door was open," Cole said. "I thought this was a conference room." "Wrong floor." Victor looked at him for a long moment. Whatever calculation he was running behind his eyes was not visible on his face. "Down," he said. Cole sat, not because he felt he had to, but because sitting down was a choice that communicated a specific thing, which was that Cole Barrett was not afraid of this room or the man in it. Victor studied him. "You're not actually a driver. I drive Ms. Whitlock to her meetings." "That's not what I said." Victor leaned forward. His voice stayed level. "I did some reading about you this week. After we met in the lobby. Call it professional habit." He opened a desk drawer and produced a single printed sheet, a Google result, by the look of it. Cole Barrett, former Navy SEAL, former clinical practitioner. License suspended following a prescription fraud investigation. Currently working as a bartender in Southie. He looked up. "That's an interesting biography for a logistics coordinator." "People need work," Cole said. "Yes." Victor set the sheet down. "People also need things that work can't always provide. Medical procedures, for instance, specialized ones." He paused. "I've also read about your daughter's situation. Maisie, 7 years old, auditory nerve condition, waiting for a trial that she may or may not get into in time." Cole's face didn't change. His hands rested in his lap, easy and still. "That's a heavy thing to carry," Victor said. His tone had shifted, not threatening. Sympathetic. The kind of sympathy that arrives wrapped around something else. A man in your position, trying to do right by a sick child, working nights for wages that don't come close to what a procedure like that costs. And Elena Whitlock offering you a lifeline. He tilted his head. "I understand why you're here, genuinely." "I'm sure you do," Cole said. Victor took a breath. When he spoke again, There was no performance in it. He was a man talking to another man about a transaction. I can give you enough money to pay for Maisie's procedure. Full cost, private funding. No waitlist. I have relationships with the program administrators. She could be scheduled within 6 weeks. He said it simply, like quoting a price. In exchange, I need you to understand that whatever you may have seen or heard while working in this building, including tonight, gets forgotten. Completely. And I need Elena to lose a reliable set of eyes. Cole looked at him. You're asking me to let you take her company, he said. I'm asking you to stay out of something that doesn't involve you, Victor said. Elena is a brilliant scientist and a mediocre executive. What I'm doing is what's necessary to protect an asset that affects a lot of people. This isn't malice, it's management. And the diagnostic flaw? Cole said. Something moved across Victor's face quick, and then completely controlled. I don't know what you're referring to, he said. The document on your side table, Cole said. The one dated 2 months ago. The classification error. The false negative rate. The room was very quiet. That's a technical document under internal review, Victor said. It's being addressed by the engineering team. By the engineering team, Cole said. Or by you. Because your signature is on it. And if Elena doesn't know it exists, then it's not under internal review. It's under suppression. Victor's expression went still. The warmth left it entirely. What was underneath was colder and harder, and considerably more honest. Think carefully, he said, about what you're doing. I have been, Cole said. All week, actually. He stood up. The money, Victor said. Think about Maisie. Cole looked at him. There was a version of himself, some earlier, more desperate version. The one who'd sat at the kitchen table in the morning staring at medical bills until the numbers stopped meaning anything that might have hesitated. He didn't let himself wonder too long about that version. You're threatening my daughter, Cole said. I want to be clear about that. You're not making an offer. You're using a 7-year-old girl as currency. That's what this is. Victor didn't answer. I'm going to walk out of this office, Cole said. And then I'm going to do what I was doing before I walked into it. He crossed to the door. Barrett. Victor's voice stopped him. Not loud. You should understand something. Men who get between me and outcomes I've already decided on don't generally enjoy what comes next. Cole's hand was on the door. He turned his head but not his body. I've been in rooms with people who were a lot more dangerous than you, he said, and a lot better at it. You're a guy in a building. Don't confuse the two. He walked out. In the stairwell, 4 flights down, he stopped on a landing and leaned against the wall and let out a slow breath. His pulse was elevated, not fear, just the old familiar physiological response to a situation with moving parts, the body getting ready for whatever was coming. He hadn't missed it exactly, but he'd recognized it immediately, the way you recognize a language you grew up speaking. He took out his phone, pulled up the photos of the document. Clear and readable on all 3 frames, he kept moving. Elena was still in her office when he reached the 14th floor. She looked up when he walked in without knocking. She'd told him on day 2 that he could stop knocking, and whatever she saw in his face made her set her pen down. What happened? He sat down across from her. Victor was in his office just now. We talked. You talked. He made me an offer. Cole set his phone on the desk and turned the photos toward her. Before that, I found this. Elena leaned forward. Read the first photograph, then the second. By the third, her face had gone through several things in quick succession: disbelief, comprehension, a white-hot flash of anger that she controlled with visible effort. He's known about this for 2 months, she said. The signature and date suggest that, yes. This flaw, she stopped, composed herself. This would have made it to clinical trials. We are 4 months from the first patient cohort. She looked up at Cole. This could have hurt people. I know. She stood up, walked to the window. The harbor lights were on by now, scattered across the dark water in a pattern that didn't care about any of this. What did he offer you? She asked, her back to him. Cole told her. All of it. The money, the surgery, the framing around Maisie. Elena stood at the window without turning around for a moment. When she turned, her expression was composed in a way that clearly cost her something. He used your daughter, she said. Yes, I'm sorry. She said it the same way she'd said it in the bar without theater. I should have anticipated that he would find the leverage. You couldn't have known what he'd find in a week. I should have... She stopped. Reconsidered, you're right. I shouldn't have put you in that position regardless. You didn't put me in it, Cole said. He did. She came back to the desk. Sat. looked at the photographs on his phone with the particular focus of someone organizing a response rather than absorbing a blow. "I need a lawyer tonight," she said. "Not Rebecca. Someone outside the company." "I have a contact," Cole said. "Criminal defense background. She's used to moving fast." Elena nodded. "The photographs, can you send them to me?" "Already on my server," he said. "Encrypted. I'll send you the access." She looked at him across the desk. "You copied the evidence before you photographed it." "Yes. Good." She was quiet for a beat. "You refused him." "Of course I refused him. A lot of people wouldn't have," she said. "I want you to know I understand what you walked away from." Cole shook his head, not dismissively, but the way you shake off something that doesn't need elaboration. "What happens now," he said, "is what matters." Elena picked up her phone. "I'm calling my attorney." Cole picked up his. He had a message from Mrs. Paulson. Maisie had wanted to tell him something about anglerfish at dinner and had made her look it up. And could he call when he got a chance? He typed back, "On my way home. Tell her I know more anglerfish facts." Challenge accepted. He set the phone on his knee. On the other side of the desk, Elena Whitlock was already talking, fast and clean and purposeful, to whoever was on the other end of that call, because she was someone who, when she understood the shape of a problem, did not wait for it to come to her. Cole sat in the chair and thought about Rebecca Sloan. Thought about the way her hands went still on the table when Victor's name came up. Thought about the particular kind of fear that wasn't about money and wasn't about ambition. There was still a piece of this that didn't fit. He was going to need to find it. Outside the window, the harbor sat dark and cold. Indifferent to all of it, the way water always is patient and present, and carrying whatever you put into it without complaint, going wherever the current decided. The alarm went off at 3 seconds past midnight. Not a fire alarm, the building's corporate security system. A layered network of motion sensors and door contacts that covered the executive floors. Cole heard it from the stairwell, 3 flights below Victor's office, and he was already moving before the second pulse of sound finished echoing off the concrete walls. He'd been expecting something. Not the alarm specifically, but some form of response from Victor, some move made in the hours following their conversation. Victor Dane was not the kind of man who absorbed a setback and went home to sleep on it. Cole had read that much clearly, the controlled surface, the patience, the way he'd sat behind his desk with that particular stillness of someone who always had a contingency already running. What Cole hadn't expected was how fast it would come. He took the stairs down, not up. Up was where security would go first, standard response, protect the executive floor, secure the perimeter from the top. Down was the direction. Nobody considered urgent until they'd already cleared the floors above. He moved without rushing, which was the trick running in a building where you weren't supposed to be invited attention. And Cole had spent enough years in enough difficult places to understand that controlled movement was almost always invisible movement. He hit the 8th floor, cut through the empty open-plan office space rows of dark monitors, the smell of recycled air and leftover coffee, and found the secondary stairwell on the east side of the building. Narrower, less used, the kind that appears on fire evacuation maps and gets ignored the rest of the time. He went down the remaining 8 floors without seeing anyone. The lobby security desk was manned by 2 guards. He could see them through the glass of the stairwell door, both on radio now, one heading to the main elevator bank, one picking up a desk phone. Cole waited 7 seconds, timing the angle of the desk camera, then pushed through the door and walked across the lobby at the measured pace of a man who worked there and was mildly inconvenienced by whatever was happening. He was through the front door before either guard stepped up. Outside, the air was cold and damp, the particular cold of Boston in mid-October that settles into clothing and stays there. He walked half a block before he stopped and leaned against the brick wall of the building adjacent and made himself breathe normally. His phone had the photographs. His server had the copies. Elena's outside attorney, a woman named Patricia Garces, whom Cole had reached through an old colleague, a former JAG officer who trusted nobody and recommended fewer people, had already received an encrypted file transfer at 11:40 that night. 40 minutes before Cole had gone back upstairs and found Victor's door unlocked a second time. He hadn't planned to go back. But something about the document, about the signature and the date and the specific nature of the flaw, had kept pulling at him on the drive down from the 14th floor, and he'd made the decision at the elevator that he needed the original, not just photographs. The original was now on Patricia Garza's secure server, along with Cole's photographed copies, and 3 additional pages of financial transfer summaries he'd found in the same file folder documents that Victor had apparently left out because he'd intended to return to his office before end of business and hadn't, for whatever reason, made it back. Cole stood on the sidewalk and looked up at the building. Lights were coming on in the upper floors. Security doing their sweep. In an hour, Victor would know exactly what was missing, and by morning he would have calculated who had taken it. He wasn't a stupid man. He would arrive at Cole Barrett within 48 hours, regardless of what story Cole tried to construct, and they both knew it. What Victor didn't know, what Cole was counting on, was that Elena had already spoken to Patricia Garza for 90 minutes that evening, and that a formal legal authorization covering Cole's information gathering on behalf of Elena Whitlock as a corporate officer of Whitlock Medical Technologies existed in signed, time-stamped, witnessed form, dated 4 days ago, the morning after Cole's first day in the building. Patricia had structured it carefully, not a private investigator's license, which Cole didn't have, but a documented authorization from a company executive to a contracted employee to gather and preserve evidence related to suspected financial misconduct. It wasn't a perfect shield. Patricia had been clear about that, but it was the difference between a corporate espionage accusation with teeth and one that fell apart in a preliminary hearing. Cole pushed off the wall and walked to where he'd parked Elena's car, 3 blocks east. He sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine and sent Elena a text. Clear. Materials secured. Call me when you're awake. He drove home. Call from Elena came at 6:12 in the morning. Cole was already awake. He'd slept badly, the thin, fitful sleep of someone whose nervous systems hadn't fully stood down, and was on his second cup of coffee at the kitchen counter when his phone buzzed. Victor filed a complaint with building security at 1A. Elena said. She sounded like she hadn't slept at all. Missing documents from his office. He's characterizing it as corporate espionage. He named you specifically. Apparently the security camera in the lobby picked you up leaving. I expected that, Cole said. Patricia has already prepared a response. She's filing our documentation with the corporate legal register this morning, the authorization, the chain of custody for the evidence, everything. She paused. Victor is going to escalate this. He'll go to the board before I can call a meeting. He'll try to frame the narrative first. Then you need to move faster than him. I know. Another pause. Cole, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Go ahead. What you found in his office, you said there were financial documents in addition to the technical report. Transfer summaries, 3 pages, accounts, amounts, dates. Enough to establish a pattern. Is it enough? For the board meeting, is it enough to remove him? Cole thought about this. Not the legal question, which was Patricia's territory, but the practical one. It's enough to open the door, he said. But the board members who are with him, Harrison, Pack, Drummond, they're going to want more than documents. They're going to want testimony. Someone inside the company who can speak to what actually happened. The line was quiet. Rebecca, Elena said. I've been thinking about that. So have I. Her voice changed slightly, not softer, but more careful. You said something the first week. That she was behaving like someone afraid rather than someone greedy. What it looked like. What does that mean practically? It means there's probably something Victor has on her, Cole said. Something personal. People who do things out of fear are different from people who do things for gain. They don't want to be where they are. They're looking for a way out that doesn't destroy them. He drank his coffee. If she has a way out, she'll take it. And if she doesn't, then she'll protect herself, which means she protects Victor. He set the mug down. I need to talk to her. Alone before the board meeting. Before Victor can get to her first. That's a risk, Elena said. If she's still with him. If she's still with him, we lose the board meeting anyway. We need her. He paused. Let me handle it. Elena was quiet for 3 seconds. For someone who moved as fast as she did, 3 seconds was a long deliberation. Okay, she said. But Cole, be careful with her. Whatever Victor has on her, it's enough to keep a smart woman doing something she knows is wrong. It's not nothing. I know, he said. He found Rebecca Sloan at 7:40 in the morning, arriving at the building 20 minutes before most of the staff. She had a coffee in each hand, which meant she'd gotten one for someone, an assistant. Probably, or a colleague she met regularly, and she was walking with the fast, slightly compressed energy of a person who had slept less than she'd needed and was compensating through momentum. Cole fell into step beside her without introduction, which he knew was aggressive, and calculated it accordingly. "Rebecca Sloan," he said. She turned her head, recognized him. He could see the recognition, and underneath it the quick flicker of something she controlled immediately. "Mr. Barrett, I need 5 minutes. I have a meeting at 8. This is more important than your 8 o'clock. He said it quietly, not aggressively. Statement of fact. She kept walking, but she didn't tell him to leave, which he noted. "There's a coffee shop on the next block," he said. "Not the building." She slowed, looked straight ahead. Her jaw was tight. The 2 coffees were leaving condensation rings on her fingers, and she didn't seem to notice. 5 minutes, she said. The coffee shop was a small independent place, the kind that had been there before the seaport had become what it was, that hadn't updated its interior since 2009 and didn't seem inclined to. 2 older men with newspapers at a window table. A barista who looked like she was working on 3 hours of sleep. Nobody who would remember faces. They sat at a table in the back. Rebecca set the 2 coffees down and looked at Cole directly, which he respected. She was scared. Whatever was happening with her, but she wasn't hiding from it. "You're not actually a driver," she said. "I figured that out the second day." "No," Cole said. "I'm not. You're working for Elena." "Yes." She looked at the table. Her hands were flat on the surface still. "Then you know what's happening." "I know enough of it." He kept his voice level. "I know Victor has been planning this for at least 18 months. I know he has 3 board members, and he believes he has you. I know he's suppressed a technical report that could have affected patient outcomes when the diagnostic system goes to trial." He paused. "What I don't know is what he has on you. That's what I'm here about." Rebecca looked up at him. For a moment he thought she was going to stand and leave, and he was prepared to let her, because forcing this conversation accomplished nothing. She didn't stand. "My daughter," she said. Her voice was steady, but it took something to keep it that way. "Caitlin. She's 24. She got into trouble gambling. Online primarily, but some of it in person. It escalated over about 18 months. She stopped. Drank from one of the coffees her own, he guessed, from how automatically she picked it up. By the time I understood how bad it was, she owed money to people who weren't interested in a payment plan. Not organized crime, nothing dramatic, just very unpleasant men who charged interest rates that doubled weekly and had people who made phone calls with specific details about daily schedules." Cole listened without expression. "Victor found out," Rebecca continued. "I still don't know how we never discussed it, and Caitlin was careful about keeping it from anyone connected to my work. But Victor found out." She set the coffee down. "He came to me 14 months ago. He told me the debts had been paid. Cleared entirely all of it, the principal and the interest, and whatever else had accumulated. He said it was a gift. No strings." She looked at Cole and her eyes were flat with something beyond ordinary bitterness. "I believed him for about 2 weeks. Then he told me what he needed, which was, at first, small things. Delaying certain internal legal reviews. Routing some communications through channels that wouldn't create standard records. Nothing that looked like anything specific." She shook her head. "And then it escalated. The way these things do. Once you've done the first small thing, the next one is easier to ask for, because they already have the first thing to hold over you." She looked at her hands. "I've helped him structure 2 pieces of the board communication that bypassed Elena. I've reviewed the takeover documentation, and I haven't filed the objections that my job requires me to file." Her voice was precise and flat, like she was reading a statement she'd prepared. "I know what that makes me." Cole said nothing for a moment. "He told you it was a gift," he said. "Yes. And you believed him." Briefly. Her mouth tightened. "I wanted to believe him. There's a difference." Cole understood the difference completely. "Rebecca," he said, "what Victor did paying that debt and then using it as leverage, that's extortion. Legally. The fact that he framed it as a gift first doesn't change what it is. What he coerced you into doing afterward is a separate matter, and there are arguments about duress that a good attorney can make." She looked at him carefully. "You're not a lawyer." "No, but I know how these situations parse. If this comes out..." "It's already coming out," Cole said. "That's why I'm here. Elena is calling an emergency board meeting. We have the financial evidence and the technical suppression. With or without your testimony, Victor is going to be removed. The question is what happens to you in that process." He held her gaze. "If you cooperate and testify about what Victor did, the initial offer, the subsequent coercion, the specific things he asked you to do, you become a witness rather than a co-conspirator. If you don't, and this goes to federal investigators, which it will, you become part of what they're investigating. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that the barista behind the counter dropped something, and the sound made them both look up briefly and then back. Caitlin doesn't know any of this, Rebecca said finally. She doesn't know Victor paid the debts. She doesn't know what I've been doing. Does she need to? She will if this becomes public. Cole thought about Maisie, about the specific weight of trying to protect someone from a truth they were going to encounter eventually, and whether the protection was for them or for you. That's a conversation for you and her, he said. I can't tell you how that goes, but I can tell you that what Victor is doing, the diagnostic flaw he's been sitting on, that's not just a corporate problem. People will use that system believing it's accurate. If it goes to trial without correction, someone doesn't catch their diagnosis early, because the algorithm told them they were clear. He looked at Rebecca steadily. Whatever he did to you, it was wrong. But you can decide what happens from here. Rebecca looked at her hands on the table. The second coffee, the one she'd brought for someone, had gone cold. Testify, she said. She said it quietly, without drama. The way decisions sound when they've been building for a long time and finally arrive at their own weight. I'll need you to speak with Patricia Garces, Cole said. She's Elena's outside attorney. Today, if possible. Today, Rebecca nodded once, picked up the cold coffee. Tell me what time. Elena called the emergency board meeting for 2 o'clock the following afternoon. She did it by the book formal notice. Correct procedural language, sent through the corporate secretary rather than through Rebecca's office, which Rebecca had confirmed for them was the right channel to avoid Victor's visibility. She gave 24 hours notice, which was the minimum allowable under the company's articles, and she sent it to all 7 board members simultaneously so Victor couldn't intercept and reframe before the others received it. Victor would know by noon what was coming. There was no preventing that. But knowing something was coming and being able to stop it were different problems. And the difference, Elena and Patricia had agreed the night before, was the evidence package they would present the moment the meeting opened. Cole spent the morning on logistics he wouldn't have called logistics in any previous part of his life. He drove Elena to Patricia's office for a final preparation session at 9. He verified, through contacts he still had from his SEAL days, people who moved in worlds where information had real currency, that Victor had not arranged anything that constituted a direct security threat to Elena or anyone in the building. He checked in with Mrs. Paulson, who had agreed to pick Maisie up from school that afternoon and stay through the evening. Maisie had left him a note on the kitchen counter that morning, as she occasionally did when she was up before him or when something felt important enough to write down. It said in her careful 7-year-old printing, "Dad, I looked up what a seal does, and I think it is basically the most important job. Also, I think anglerfish could probably beat a shark. Love, Maisie." She had drawn a small fish in the corner with what appeared to be a lightning bolt on its head. He'd folded it and put it in his jacket pocket. The board meeting was held in the 14th floor conference room, the large one, the room with the long table and the view of the harbor, that everyone in the building used as a shorthand for important occasions. Elena arrived first with Cole and Patricia, the 4 remote board members joined by video link. Harrison, Pack, and Drummond arrived together, which told Cole everything he needed to know about their coordination. Victor arrived last. He came in without apparent urgency, jacket on, the silver-templed confidence still fully operational. He looked at Elena at the head of the table, then at Patricia Garces beside her, then at Cole standing near the side wall, not seated at the table, not performing any obvious role, just present in the specific way that a person who has been trained to hold a room can be present, and something registered behind Victor's eyes. Not fear, something more calculated. A man rapidly rerunning numbers. He sat down. "Elena," he said, "before we begin, I'd like to address—" "We'll follow the agenda," Elena said. Her voice was level and final, the voice of someone who has decided exactly what this room is and what it isn't. Victor closed his mouth. Elena began. She presented the financial evidence, first the transfer documents, the account structures, the timeline of unauthorized movements over 18 months. Patricia walked the board through each piece methodically, citing the specific financial controls that had been bypassed and the documentation that established Victor's direct authorization of each transfer. The remote board members, the 4 who weren't Harrison, Pack, and Drummond, were quiet and attentive. In the particular way, people are quiet when they're receiving information that rearranges what they thought they understood. Harrison interrupted twice. Both times, Patricia addressed the interruption with a specific document, and Harrison went quiet again. Then Elena presented the technical report. She put it on the shared screen, the full document, Victor's signature and date clearly visible, classification error detailed across 4 pages of engineering language that Elena translated into plain terms without hesitation, because she had spent 4 years living inside this technology, and she understood every word of it. This report was generated 2 months ago, Elena said. It documents a systematic flaw in the diagnostic classification algorithm that produces false negative results in 8 to 12% of early-stage cases across 3 disease categories. This report was not disclosed to the board, not disclosed to the engineering team's public review process, and not disclosed to me. She looked down the table. The clinical trial cohort begins in 4 months. Without correction, this system would have provided inaccurate results to real patients. The room was very quiet. Victor's expression had not changed. He was watching Elena with the focused attention of a man tracking multiple variables simultaneously, still calculating, still looking for the opening. Victor, said one of the remote board members, a woman named Chandra Lin, the board's independent medical technology advisor, whose camera showed her leaning forward with her glasses in her hand. Is this report authentic? Victor looked at the camera. The document is authentic, he said carefully. The situation was being actively managed by the engineering team under my oversight. Managed without board disclosure, Elena said. It was in process. 2 months, Elena said, during which you continued to represent to this board and to our regulatory contacts that the system was on schedule for trial. Elena. Victor shifted. His voice was still controlled, but the temperature in it had changed. You're presenting this as though I have a witness, Elena said. Victor stopped. Patricia opened the door to the adjacent room. Rebecca Sloan walked in. She was pale. She walked to the chair Patricia indicated, at the side of the table perpendicular to Victor, and she sat down without looking at him. She had a folder in front of her, her own notes, Cole guessed, organized the way lawyers organize things, even when they're testifying rather than arguing. Rebecca, Victor said. His voice was very quiet now. Think carefully. She has, Cole said from the wall. Several heads turned. Victor looked at Cole with the particular expression of a man who has been underestimating someone for weeks and has just finished underestimating them. Rebecca opened her folder. She spoke for 17 minutes. She described the debt payment, the initial framing as a gift, the subsequent requests, the escalation, the 2 specific board communications she had helped structure to bypass Elena, and the takeover documentation she had reviewed and declined to flag. She was specific and precise, and she did not editorialize. She stated what had happened and when, and she answered Patricia's clarifying questions in the same flat, factual register. When she finished, the room was silent for long enough that the ventilation system became audible. Victor looked at the table. Something had gone out of his face, not the composure, not entirely, but the forward momentum. The sense that he was already 3 steps ahead. He was no longer 3 steps ahead. Pack spoke first. Then Harrison in a voice that had lost its early steadiness. Both men were now in a position that Cole had seen people navigate before, the position of having committed to a side that was no longer viable, and trying to calculate how much of themselves they could salvage. It was not a dignified position, and it produced undignified behavior. Drummond said nothing at all. The vote to remove Victor Dane as CFO and place his activities under formal investigation was 5-2. Harrison and Pack voted against. Drummond abstained, which functionally meant the same thing as a yes, and everyone in the room understood it. Victor sat through the vote without speaking. When the result was announced, he stood, picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He looked at Elena first, a long, measured look that contained something Cole couldn't fully parse, something between acknowledgement and warning, and then he looked at Cole. Tell me something, Victor said quietly. Was it worth it? Ask me in about 6 weeks, Cole said. Security was waiting in the hallway. Victor walked out with them, unhurried, his shoulders square, maintaining the posture until the end. Cole watched until the elevator doors closed. Then everything in the room seemed to release slightly, not celebration, nothing like that, but the particular deflation of sustained tension, finally having somewhere to go. Patricia was already on her phone. 2 of the remote board members were talking to each other. Chandra Lin was asking Elena a question about the engineering team's remediation timeline. Elena was answering, doing the work already, because there was still work to do, and she understood that. Cole walked to the window. The harbor was doing what it always did, gray and indifferent and permanent. The same water that had been there before any of this and would be there long after. He stood looking at it for a moment and thought about Maisie's note in his jacket pocket, the small fish with the lightning bolt on its head, and thought about 6 weeks being a specific amount of time in a very specific context. Then his phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. No name. 5 words. This isn't over. Watch Maisie. The room, the board meeting, the harbor view. All of it went somewhere else immediately. Cole was already moving toward the door. He called Mrs. Paulson on his way to the elevator. It rang 4 times, and he was calculating the drive time to Maisie's school 11 minutes at this hour, 8 if the lights cooperated when she picked up. Mrs. Paulson, he said. Where's Maisie right now? She's right here, honey. We're at the park on Clement Street. She's on the swings. Stay where you are, Cole said. Don't move, I'm coming. He was in the car in 90 seconds. He drove the way he'd been trained to drive in environments that required speed without accidents, fast but not reckless, making decisions a block ahead, reading intersections before he reached them. His hands were steady on the wheel, and his mind was working the specific problem in front of him, which was the 3 variables: where Maisie was, where the threat originated, and how much time existed between those 2 facts. He reached Clement Street Park in 9 minutes, Mrs. Paulson was standing near the swing, set with her hand shading her eyes, looking toward the street, and Maisie was on the swing in her school coat, pumping her legs with absolute focus, her dark hair out behind her in the way it always was when she was moving fast enough that she didn't think about it. When she saw Cole's car, she dropped her feet and dragged herself to a stop, and her face did the complicated thing it did when she wasn't sure if something was wrong, or normal. She'd learned to read him well. Enough to know when normal and wrong looked similar. Cole was out of the car before it fully stopped. He crossed to her in 6 steps, crouched down to her level, put his hands on her shoulders. Checked her over the automatic trained assessment that he couldn't turn off, and that, in this moment, he was grateful for. Dad, she said. What happened? Nothing, he said. Wanted to get you. She looked at him, the way she looked at things. She wasn't entirely sure about the particular squint of a child who has learned that adults say nothing when something is true. You're doing the face, she said. What face? The one when you're worried but you don't want to say so. He pulled her into a hug that was probably too tight and lasted probably too long, but she let him. She always let him. She put her arms around his neck and held on with the uncomplicated directness of a 7-year-old who understood that sometimes the hug was the thing and everything else could wait. I'm good, Dad, she said quietly, into his shoulder. I'm right here. He stood up, took her hand, looked at Mrs. Paulson, who had the intelligent understanding of a woman who had been around long enough to know when not to ask questions. Thank you, he said. You call me anytime, she said. And she meant it the way people mean things when they've seen enough of a situation to understand it. He buckled Maisie into the back seat, and she immediately began telling him about something that had happened at school involving a substitute teacher and a misunderstanding about the bathroom pass schedule, which was apparently both complicated and extremely funny, and he listened to every word of it and laughed in the right places and kept one eye on the rearview mirror the entire drive home. That night, he contacted the detective he knew from his SEAL network, a man named Pryor, ex-military intelligence, currently doing private security consulting in the Boston area, and gave him Victor's name and the content of the text message. Pryor ran it through his contacts within 2 hours. Victor had violated the conditions of his release from police custody that afternoon. He'd made a phone call from a number he wasn't supposed to be using to a person who appeared in 2 prior investigations as an intermediary for hire. The text to Cole's phone had come through that intermediary. Pryor reported this to the detective on the corporate fraud case, who was already building the file. By the following morning, the violation had been documented and submitted to the court. A judge reviewed it the same afternoon. Victor Dane's bail was revoked. He was remanded to custody pending trial, at which point the leverage he'd been holding over anyone connected to the case, the implied ability to reach out, to threaten, to use intermediaries, went with him through the courthouse door. Cole received confirmation of the remand at 8:15 in the evening. He was sitting at the kitchen table helping Maisie with a worksheet about ocean ecosystems, a subject she had strong opinions about and was inclined to improve upon with additional drawings in the margins. When his phone buzzed and he read the message, he set the phone face down on the table and went back to the worksheet. Maisie had drawn what appeared to be an anglerfish in the margin of the section about coral reefs, which was not technically accurate. And he pointed this out, and she said anglerfish could be anywhere they wanted to be, actually, and he said that wasn't how ecosystems worked, and she said she was pretty sure it was. And they went back and forth about this for several minutes in the easy, unhurried way they had developed for disagreements that didn't matter, which were the best kind. Outside, the city settled into its nighttime rhythms. Somewhere out in the harbor, the water moved the way it always moved, carrying whatever it carried, going wherever it went. Corporate war, as Elena had called it, was finished. But Cole sat at that kitchen table with his daughter's worksheet and her marginalia anglerfish and understood with the particular clarity that comes at the end of something hard that the most important. Morning of both their lives was still ahead of them. Maisie's surgery was scheduled for the coming week, and there was not a single thing his training had given him that was going to be any use at all when those hospital doors closed. The surgery was scheduled for 7:15 in the morning. Cole had known the time for 6 days. He'd written it on the small whiteboard in the kitchen, the one they used for grocery lists, and Maisie's homework reminders, and the occasional note about whose turn it was to take out the recycling, and then erased it, because seeing it written in that context between buy milk and library book due Thursday felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. Kept the time in his head instead, where it sat like a stone in still water, present in everything, changing the weight of ordinary moments without announcing itself. The night before, he'd let Maisie stay up until 9:30. She'd wanted to watch a nature documentary about whales, humpbacks specifically, because she'd been reading about them and had developed the intense, focused interest she brought to subjects that genuinely captured her, which was most subjects once she decided they mattered. They sat on the couch with the lights low, Maisie in her pajamas with her feet tucked up under her, leaning against Cole's side in the unself-conscious way she still did at 7. And they watched humpback whales move through blue water on the television screen, vast and slow and completely indifferent to the camera following them. The documentary explained how humpbacks communicated the low, complex songs that traveled through water for miles, frequencies that human ears at the surface could barely register, but that other whales received with perfect clarity across entire ocean basins. Maisie was very still watching this. Cole looked at her profile, the small, serious face, the hearing aid in her left ear, the way her eyes tracked the whales with something that looked like it went past curiosity into something more personal. "Do you think they know other whales can hear them?" she asked. "Like, do they know the song is going somewhere?" "I think they just sing," Cole said, "whether anyone hears it or not." She considered this. "That's kind of sad. Or kind of brave," he said. She thought about it a while longer. "Then, I want to hear them. For real. Not just on TV. We'll go," he said. "When things settle down, we'll go out on the water." She looked up at him. Promise? He'd made promises to Maisie carefully for 3 years, ever since understood that she cataloged them with the meticulous exactness of someone building a ledger of what the world owed her. He didn't promise things he wasn't sure of. It was one of the rules he'd set for himself without formalizing it, the same way some things become rules without ceremony. "Promise," he said. She nodded and turned back to the whales, apparently satisfied. Within 20 minutes, she was asleep against his arm, which was how it usually ended when he let her stay up past 9. He sat in the dark with the documentary still running and his daughter's weight against his side and tried to prepare himself for the morning. He didn't manage it. You couldn't prepare for certain things the way you could prepare for. Others couldn't run the scenarios and build the contingencies because there were no contingencies. There was only the surgery and the surgeon and the hours in between, and everything Cole Barrett had ever been trained to do was perfectly useless against the simple fact of waiting. Turned the television off around 11, carried Maisie to her room. She stirred but didn't wake, made a small protesting sound, and then went still again and stood in her doorway for a moment in the dark, listening to her breathe. Then he went to his own room and lay on top of the covers and watched the ceiling for 2 hours before sleep found him. They arrived at Boston Children's at 6:40 in the morning. Elena met them in the lobby. Cole hadn't asked her to come. He hadn't needed to. She'd called the night before and said she would be there at 6:30, and he'd said the appointment wasn't until 7:15, and she'd said she knew that. And that had been the end of the conversation. She was already there when they came through the automatic doors, standing near the information desk in a dark coat, holding 2 coffees, one for Cole, one that turned out to be a hot chocolate for Maisie, which she produced from a bag with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who had thought it through in advance. Maisie accepted it with the grave seriousness she brought to unexpected kindness. "Thank you," Maisie said. "You're welcome," Elena said. Crouched to Maisie's level. "How are you feeling?" Maisie thought about it honestly, the way she always thought about direct questions. "A little nervous," she said, "but also kind of curious. I've never had surgery before." "I haven't either," Elena said. "I'd probably be more nervous than curious." "You can hold Dad's hand if you want," Maisie offered. "He lets me when I'm nervous." Elena glanced up at Cole, who was looking at his daughter with an expression he couldn't entirely control. "I'll keep that in mind," Elena said. The intake process took 40 minutes. There were forms and wristbands and conversations with nurses who spoke to Maisie directly, which she appreciated, and conversations with the anesthesiology team, and a final pre-op consult with Dr. Anita Rowe herself, who came into the pre-op room in scrubs and spoke with the relaxed precision of someone who had done this a great many times without letting repetition make her careless. Dr. Rowe was in her late 40s, medium height, with the particular quality of attention that the best physicians have, the kind where you feel like you are the only problem they are currently solving, even when you know they have a full day ahead of them. "Maisie," she said, sitting on the stool beside the bed where Maisie was now in a hospital gown, the hot chocolate finished, the paper cup on the bedside table. "I want to explain exactly what we're going to do today, so you know what to expect when you wake up." "Okay," Maisie said. "The nerves in your ear that send sound signals to your brain have been slowly getting quieter, Dr. Rowe said, like a radio losing its signal. What we're going to do is go in very carefully and give those nerves a treatment, a combination of microsurgery and a medication that helps nerve tissue repair itself. We're hoping to turn the signal back up. Will it hurt?" "Not during. You'll be asleep the whole time. When you wake up, your ear will probably feel full and strange, and that's normal. It'll take some time before we can tell how much better the signal is getting. A few weeks, possibly." Maisie nodded slowly. "A few weeks is okay," she said. "I'm good at waiting." Dr. Rowe smiled. Not the performed smile people give children, but the real one, quick and unguarded. "I believe that," she said. She looked at Cole. "Any final questions before we take her back?" Cole had 100 questions, and none of them were answerable. "No," he said. "We'll take good care of her," Dr. Rowe said. She said it simply, without the flourish of reassurance, which was why Cole believed it. The moment came faster than he expected. A nurse appeared, and it was time, and Maisie looked at Cole with the expression that she almost never showed, the one underneath the composure, the one that was just 7 years old and aware that something real was happening. And he leaned down and held her face in both hands the way he'd done since she was small, his thumbs against her cheeks. "I'll be right here," he said. "The whole time. Right here." She nodded. "I know," she said. He kissed her forehead. The doors closed. Cole stood in the hallway and looked at the doors for a moment after they stopped moving. Then he turned and walked to the waiting area and sat down in one of the chairs and put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands and breathed. He stayed like that for a while. He heard Elena sit down beside him. She didn't say anything. She didn't put her hand on his back or offer a word about how it would be fine, which was the most useful thing she could have done, because it would be fine or it wouldn't, and saying so didn't change the variable. After a while, he sat up and picked up the coffee she'd brought and drank it. "How long did they say?" Elena asked. 3 to 5 hours, depending on what they find. She nodded. "You should go," he said. "You have things to deal with." "I have a laptop," she said. "I can work from here." Elena Cole. She looked at him with the direct steadiness that was the most consistent thing about her. "I'm not going anywhere, so stop asking." He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once and went back to his coffee. The board had formally accepted Elena's resignation 2 days prior. It had not been a dramatic scene. There had been no confrontation, no speech. Elena had submitted the letter to the corporate secretary at 9 in the morning and followed it with a call to Chandra Lin, who was the only board member she trusted to handle the transition with any real competence. Chandra had been quiet for a long moment on the phone and then said, "I wish you'd fight for this." "I know," Elena had said. "Is there anything I can say?" "No." Another pause. "What are you going to do?" Elena had looked out the window of her office, her former office, technically, though she still had 3 weeks of transition time at the harbor. "Something different," she'd said. "Something that actually matters to me." It hadn't been an impulsive decision. She'd been arriving at it for longer than she'd let herself acknowledge through the months of the Victor situation, through the late nights spent managing board politics that had nothing to do with medicine or patients or the actual work, through the steady accumulation of evidence that the company she'd built had become something she was no longer sure she recognized. The breaking point wasn't the betrayal. The breaking point was that even after the betrayal was over, even with Victor removed, and the evidence in federal hands and the board stabilized, she'd sat in that 14th floor office and tried to find the feeling that had gotten her there in the first place, the specific urgency that had made her give up a secure research position to start something from nothing in a converted Cambridge warehouse, and it wasn't there. It wasn't that the mission had changed. It was that the structure around the mission had grown into something that required a different kind of person to manage, and Elena was not interested in becoming that person. She still had patents. She still had the technical foundation she'd built. She still had the relationships with researchers, with clinicians, with people who understood the actual medicine that she'd developed over years. What she was going to build next would be smaller and slower, and it would not produce the kind of financial returns that made investors enthusiastic. But it would do the thing she'd originally set out to do, which was make a specific kind of help available to people who needed it and couldn't access it. She'd described the outline of it to Cole 3 days before the surgery, sitting in the Anchor and Rye, his bar, the place they'd met, which felt like the right location for the conversation over drinks she'd bought, which he'd pointed out was technically a violation of his bartender's professional code, since it was his bar and he should be buying. "You're not working tonight," she'd said. "Old habits," he'd said. She'd laid it out. The foundation structure, the focus on pediatric cases, the specific gap she wanted to fill families who had a viable treatment option but no pathway to access it, the ones who fell through the spaces between insurance coverage and research trials and financial assistance programs. The Maisie problem, as she'd come to think of it privately. Problem that existed in thousands of variations across the country and that nobody was solving systematically because systematic solutions were hard and unglamorous and didn't generate press releases. Cole had listened without interrupting, which she'd learned was his mode when something mattered to him. The more it mattered, the less he said while processing it. "You'd need a medical director," he said when she finished. "Yes, someone who understands both the clinical side and the administrative navigation. The insurance appeals, the trial program relationships, the physician networks. Yes." He'd looked at her. "My license is being reviewed." Patricia's submission to the board was complete last week. The evidentiary package establishes the full timeline, Webb's prior review, the hospital compliance decision, the sequence of the complaint filing. Her assessment is that the case for reinstatement is strong. It's not guaranteed, but it's strong. She held his gaze. "I think you should plan for getting it back." He'd been quiet for a long time. Not the processing, quiet something different. The quiet of a person standing at the edge of something large and making sure they understand what they're looking at before they step. "If I get it back," he said finally. "When?" she said. He'd looked at her with the particular expression she had come to recognize as Cole not knowing quite what to do with something he wanted very much. It wasn't an expression he showed often. When it appeared, it was brief. "When?" he said. "The surgery took 4 hours and 20 minutes. Cole knew the duration exactly, because he tracked it not consciously, not with a running calculation, but the way the body keeps time when it's waiting for something that matters. He drank 2 more coffees and ate half a sandwich from the hospital cafeteria that Elena had brought back without asking, because she'd gone to find food, and that was what she came back with. He walked the length of the waiting room corridor several times, which was 42 steps in one direction and 42 back, and he stopped counting at some point because counting made it worse. He sat with Elena, and they talked about small things he told her about Maisie's anglerfish drawings. She told him about the first office she'd ever rented, space above a dry cleaner in Somerville, that had smelled permanently of chemicals and where the heat worked only intermittently throughout the winter, and the small things filled the time without filling the space. Underneath, which was where the real waiting lived. At one point, Elena fell asleep in the chair beside him, her head tipping sideways and then correcting, then tipping again and staying. She was still in her coat. Cole watched her for a moment, the particular unguardedness of someone asleep in an uncomfortable chair in a hospital waiting room, the way the professional composure went somewhere else, when consciousness let it go and thought about what it meant that she was here. Not the gesture of it, the fact of it, The simple, unembarrassed presence of another person who had chosen to be in this specific room on this specific morning. He hadn't had that in a long time. He looked away, drank his cold coffee, watched the corridor. At 12:37, Doctor. Anita Rowe came through the door. Cole was on his feet before she'd fully cleared the doorway, an automatic movement, body ahead of thought. He felt Elena wake beside him, heard the small sound of her sitting upright. Dr. Rowe walked toward him. Her expression he'd learned to read medical faces in his clinical years, the specific architecture of what news looked like before it was spoken, was not the careful neutral of someone managing a family's expectations downward. It was something else. Tired. The way surgeons are tired after long, focused work, but underneath the tiredness there was something open. "Mr. Barrett," she said. She stopped in front of him. "Procedure went well. Better than our primary projection, actually. The nerve architecture was more intact than the imaging had suggested. We were able to work with more viable tissue than we'd planned for." She kept her voice measured, but she let the information be what it was. "The repair is as complete as we could make it. She's in recovery now. She'll be groggy for a few hours." Cole heard the words in sequence, and his brain processed them in the correct order, and he understood what they meant, and none of that was the thing that was happening in his body, which was something entirely different from understanding. "The outcomes," he said. His voice came out steady. He was grateful for that. "What are we looking at? We won't know the full picture for 3 to 4 weeks. The nerves need time to establish the new signal pathways. But based on what we saw during the procedure, I'm cautiously optimistic about significant recovery. I want to be careful not to give you a number that becomes a thing you're measuring against, because every patient's recovery is its own process. But I'm not being cautious because I'm worried. I'm being cautious because it's honest." She looked at him directly. "She did well, Cole. She really did." Cole put his hand over his mouth for a moment. He didn't cry, or rather, he felt the full pressure of it arrive and chose, as he had chosen in a long series of hard moments over the past 3 years, to hold it, not out of pride, out of the particular habit of a person who had learned to process difficult things privately, the way you develop habits when you've been alone with them for long enough. But it was close. "Can I see her?" he asked. "Give the recovery room staff about 40 minutes, Doctor," Rose said. "She'll be more herself by then. Maisie seems like the type who would prefer to be more herself before company arrives." "She is," Cole said. "Exactly that." Dr. Rowe nodded. Put her hand briefly on his arm, in the way that good physicians sometimes do, not a gesture of performance, but of simple human acknowledgement, one person to another, and then she turned and went back through the door she'd come from, back to whatever came next in her day. Cole stood in the corridor. Elena was beside him. She didn't say anything about his face. "Okay," he said after a moment. "Okay," she agreed. He sat back down. He put his forearms on his knees and looked at the floor and let himself be where he was for a minute, just that, just present in the specific relief of it, which was not the same as joy, was something that came before joy, something quieter and more fundamental than joy, the particular feeling of a thing you'd been afraid of for a very long time turning out differently than the worst version. Then he straightened up. "You should eat the rest of that sandwich," Elena said. "Terrible," he said. "I know. Eat it anyway." He ate it. Maisie was exactly herself by the time they let Cole into the recovery room. She was propped against the raised head of the hospital bed, wearing her own pajamas that Cole had packed in the bag she'd requested specifically the night before, the ones with the yellow stars, and she had an ice pack against the left side of her head, and she was telling a nurse about anglerfish with the slightly unfocused intensity of someone still partially under the influence of anesthesia, which apparently did not impair her ability to discuss deep-sea biology. When she saw Cole, she stopped mid-sentence. "Hi, Dad." "Hi, Bug." He sat in the chair beside the bed and took her hand. Her fingers curled around his immediately. "How do you feel?" "Weird," she said. "My ear feels like it's full of cotton. Normal." The nurse said that too. She looked at him. Her eyes were clearer than he'd expected. She was fighting the grogginess, which was typical Maisie. Did it work? He thought about what Dr. Rowe had said, about honesty and about numbers becoming benchmarks. "We have to wait a few weeks to know for sure," he said. "But Dr. Rowe thinks it went really well." Maisie processed this. "A few weeks," she said. "Yes." She nodded, the same nod as the night before the surgery. "Matter of fact." "I'm good at waiting," she said again. "I know you are." She looked past him toward the door. "Is Elena here?" "In the waiting room." "She stayed the whole time." "Yes." Maisie looked at him with the particular expression she got when she was thinking about something more than she was saying, which was an expression he'd seen on her face since she was 4 years old, and which still occasionally caught him off guard with how much it looked like her mother. "I like her," Maisie said. "I know you do. Do you like her?" Cole looked at his daughter. The cotton in the ear, the yellow star pajamas, the ice pack, the entirely straightforward sincerity of the question. "Yeah," he said, "I do." Maisie seemed satisfied with this. She leaned her head back against the pillow. "Can she come in?" "I'll ask." He stepped out and found Elena exactly where he'd left her, laptop open on her knees, a call apparently just finished based on the phone she was setting down. She looked up. "Maisie wants to know if you'll come in," he said. Elena closed the laptop without hesitating. They kept Maisie overnight for observation standard procedure. Nothing concerning. The nursing staff were efficient, and the night was uneventful in the way hospital nights are when the thing you were afraid of didn't happen. Cole slept badly in the reclining chair beside the bed, which was not designed for sleeping, and which he was grateful for anyway, because the discomfort kept him present. He woke twice to check on Maisie, both times finding her deeply asleep, her breathing even, the monitors beside her steady and quiet. Elena went home around 9 that evening. Maisie had been asleep for an hour, and Cole had told her there was no point in both of them being uncomfortable in hospital chairs. And this time she had agreed, which told him she was more tired than she was letting show. At the door she'd stopped. "My attorney got word today," she said. "The licensing board confirmed receipt of the full submission, but I did the review." Cole looked at her. "How long?" 4 to 6 weeks. "Patricia thinks the outcome is favorable." She held his gaze. "I want to start building the foundation structure in the meantime. Not the formal organization, yet just the architecture. The framework. So when things are settled, we can move." "Okay," he said. She nodded. "Started to go, Elena," he said. Turned. He thought about what to say and arrived at the simplest version of it, which was usually the only version worth saying. "Thank you," he said, "for today. For all of it." She looked at him for a moment with the expression she almost never showed, the one underneath the brisk competence, the one that was just a person who had been through something and was still working out what she felt about it. "You're welcome," she said, and then she left. Cole went back to the reclining chair and his daughter's quiet breathing, and the steady green lines of the monitor, and the particular stillness of a hospital at 11 o'clock, when the business of the day had passed and the night had settled in, and the building held its patients carefully in the way hospitals do, when the people inside them have been through something and need the world to simply leave them alone for a while. He thought about the foundation, about the work it would be, the complexity of building something from nothing, which he'd never done, but which he understood in the bones, the way you understand territory you've moved through even when you can't draw a map of it. He thought about his medical license, about the exam room he'd worked in for 3 years before everything went wrong, the particular satisfaction of a patient who came in frightened and left with information, with a plan, with some of the fear replaced by something more manageable. He'd missed that. He'd missed it in the way you miss things that were part of who you were before the part got taken. He thought about Maisie saying, "I'm good at waiting," with the calm certainty of someone who had decided that was true and was sticking to it. He thought about humpback whale songs, traveling through dark water for miles to reach other whales that the sing-sing whale would never see. At some point he fell asleep in the chair. He dreamed about the ocean. Not a specific ocean, not a memory, just the texture of it. The sound of it, the way deep water looks from the surface when the light is right, and you can almost see into it, but not quite. This licensing board's formal letter arrived on a Wednesday morning, 31 days after Patricia's admission. Cole read it at the kitchen table. Maisie at school, the apartment quiet around him. Coffee going cold at his elbow. He read it twice. Then he set it down on the table and looked at the lobster magnet on the refrigerator. For a moment, still there, still holding the grocery list. Still the same cheerful, slightly absurd thing Maisie had picked out at Faneuil Hall. The original complaint had been formally reviewed and found to have been submitted in violation of disclosure requirements, based on the evidence of the hospital compliance process predating Cole's case. The licensing suspension was vacated. His credentials were restored with full standing. He picked up his phone and called Patricia first, because it was her work. She sounded genuinely pleased, which lawyers who had seen everything rarely were. "Clean outcome," she said. "No conditions, no monitoring period." "Full reinstatement, thank you," he said. Don't thank me. The evidence was the evidence. I just organized it. A pause. What are you going to do now? Something I should have been doing, he said. Called Elena second. She picked up on the first ring, which meant she'd been waiting. Tell me, she said, he told her. The silence on her end lasted about 3 seconds, and then she said, okay, I'm coming over. We have work to do. It's 9 in the morning. Good. Early start. She arrived 40 minutes later with a laptop bag and a folder of documents and 2 coffees from a place she'd apparently found that was better than the nearest chain. And she sat across from him at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd stared at bills, where Maisie did her homework, where the lobster magnate had witnessed more of his life than he cared to quantify. And they began to build something. Not quickly. Not cleanly. There were arguments that morning about the foundation's governance structure, about the risk of taking on cases with unclear legal standing, about whether Cole's clinical role should be formal or advisory. Elena had opinions, and so did Cole, and neither of them was inclined to simply defer, which made the conversation inefficient, and also, was fairly sure, correct. The things built by people who pushed back on each other honestly tended to be sturdier than the things built by agreement. At one point, Elena said something about the intake process that Cole thought was wrong, and he said so, and she said he wasn't seeing the liability angle. And he said the liability angle was creating a system that would exclude exactly the patient they were trying to help it. And she looked at him across the table with the look she got when something had actually landed. Fine, she said, but we need a legal review before we finalize the intake criteria. Agreed, he said, and you have to stop making that face when I bring up liability. I don't make a face, you make a face. He drank his coffee. I'll work on it, he said. She went back to the folder. The morning moved forward. Outside, Boston did what it did in November, gray and cold and functional. The city's operating at its own pace, regardless of what was happening in any particular kitchen on any particular street. Cole looked at the letter on the corner of the table, then at the folder in front of Elena, then at the kitchen, the ordinary familiar mess of it, the dishes from breakfast, Maisie's backpack hanging by the door, the drawing she'd done of the anglerfish taped to the cabinet above the toaster, which she'd put there herself, and which Cole had discovered would require architectural intervention to remove because she'd used 3 layers of tape and pressed them down with considerable conviction. 3 weeks until the hearing test. 3 weeks until they knew. He pulled the folder toward him and got back to work. On the Friday before the appointment, Maisie came home from school with a worksheet about ecosystems, which she dropped on the kitchen table in favor of climbing onto the counter to look out the window at the street below, which she did occasionally when something was on her mind. Cole was making dinner. He let the silence run for a minute. Dad, she said. Yeah, what if it didn't work? Turned the heat down on the pan, turned around and leaned against the counter. She was still looking out the window, the late afternoon light coming through at the angle it did in November, falling across her profile. Then we figure out what's next, he said. Is there a next? There's always a next, he said. It might not be the same next we were planning. There's one. She looked at him. Are you scared? He considered lying. He considered the version of this that was comforting and clean, and did not put his own anxiety into a 7-year-old's field to carry. Then he thought about what he'd told Elena in the bar, the first night, about the difference between surviving and keeping going, about the things he'd learned from the hardest years being the ones that told the truth. Yeah, he said. A little. Maisie looked at him for a moment. Then she climbed down from the counter and crossed to him and put her arms around his waist and pressed her face against his shirt. Me too, she said. But I think it worked. Yeah, I think so. She pulled back and looked up at him with the certainty she sometimes produced without apparent source. The kind that had nothing to do with evidence and everything to do with who she was. Feel like it did. Cole put his hand on the top of her head. Okay, he said. Okay, she agreed. She picked up her backpack and her ecosystem worksheet and disappeared down the hallway toward her room. And Cole stood in the kitchen and listened to the ordinary sounds of her, moving through the apartment, the bedroom door, the desk chair, the particular sound of her talking quietly to herself while she worked, which she'd done since she was 4, and which he had always found, in the private way of things you couldn't explain to anyone else, one of the most comforting sounds in the world. He turned the heat back up on the pan. 3 more days. The appointment was at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. Cole had been awake since 4:30. He didn't get up right away. He lay in the dark and listened to the apartment breathe around him, the particular quiet of a city not yet decided about the day, and he tried to do the thing he'd always been able to do in the worst moments of his life, which was locate the part of himself that was steady and stand in it. It worked, usually. It had worked in rooms and situations that most people would not survive thinking too carefully about. It had worked in the years after his career collapsed, when the steady part was the only part left, and everything else had to be rebuilt around it. It worked less reliably when the variable was Maisie. He got up at 5, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table in the dark, with the mug between his hands, and looked at the anglerfish drawing still taped above the toaster. Maisie had added to it over the past weeks. There was now a second fish in the lower corner, smaller, which, upon examination, appeared to be following the larger one. She hadn't mentioned it. She'd just added it without commentary, the way she did things that mattered to her without making a production of them. He thought about the last 3 weeks. About the way Maisie had moved through them with the matter-of-fact patience she'd promised herself going to school. Doing her homework, arguing about bedtime, holding his hand in the car sometimes without saying anything, the way she'd done since she was small, and the car was where she processed things. She hadn't asked again whether it had worked. She'd said she thought it had, the night before the appointment last week, and then she'd appeared to file the question away and live as if the answer were already settled. He wasn't sure if that was composure or faith, or simply the particular economy of a child who had learned not to spend energy on things she couldn't change. Maybe all three. Maybe those things were the same thing, said differently. 6:15, he heard her alarm go off down the hallway. Thud of feet, the cabinet that stuck, the cereal. He refilled his coffee and watched her appear in the kitchen doorway in the star pajamas she'd been cycling back to them lately, ever since the surgery. The way kids return to familiar things when something large has happened with sleep still on her face, and her hair at an angle that suggested she'd been sleeping hard. Morning, she said, morning bug. She got her cereal and sat across from him. They didn't talk much. The morning had its own gravity, and they both felt it. At 7, Maisie looked up from her bowl. Is Elena coming? She'll meet us there. Maisie nodded and went back to her cereal. Then, Dad, what time did you wake up? Around 5. She looked at him with the expression that meant she was deciding something. I woke up at 4, she said, but I stayed in bed because I didn't want to wake you up. He looked at his daughter, 7 years old, awake at 4 in the morning, with the weight of her own hearing test on her, lying quietly in her room so she wouldn't disturb him. Could have come and gotten me, he said. I know, she said, but you needed sleep. Cole put his coffee down. Maisie, yeah, you don't have to manage my feelings. She considered this with the seriousness she brought to things she thought were genuinely worth considering. I know, she said again. I just didn't want you to worry more. Worrying about you is my job, he said. You don't have to protect me from it. She thought about it a while longer. Then she said, okay, but also you do the face. Why don't you do the face, Dad? He drank his coffee. Eat your cereal, he said. She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. Boston Children's Audiology Department occupied a wing on the 3rd floor that had been designed with children in mind. The walls were painted in colors that stopped just short of overwhelming, and there were fish on the ceiling, which Maisie noticed immediately and approved of. And the receptionist had the particular, practiced warmth of someone who understood that the families coming through were usually arriving with something large and unresolved. Elena was there when they arrived, which Cole had expected. She was in the waiting area, in a gray coat, laptop closed this time, just sitting, which was a thing Elena did not naturally do, and which she was clearly making an effort at. When Maisie saw her, she walked straight to her, and Elena stood, and the hug was quick and unself-conscious and unremarkable in the way that things become unremarkable when they've happened enough times to feel like they belong. Cole watched this. He had been watching it for 3 weeks, the way Maisie had incorporated Elena into the ordinary fabric of things, the way she texted her photographs of interesting fish facts she found in library books, the way she'd asked Elena to explain what a foundation did, and then spent 45 minutes asking follow-up questions until she understood it fully, the way she simply assumed Elena's presence in things, without making a ceremony of it. Maisie had always been careful about people. She'd grown up with a father who was careful about people, who kept his circle small and his trust provisional, and she'd absorbed that the way children absorb the things they live inside. But she had decided, with the directness that was her most consistent quality, that Elena was someone who stayed. And once Maisie decided something like that, she committed to it fully, without hedging. Cole had watched Elena receive this with a care that he found in the private way of things he didn't say aloud genuinely moving. Elena was not a sentimental person. She was precise and fast, and she had the habit of useful people of going straight to the problem. But with Maisie, she slowed down. She answered every question fully. She didn't talk to her the way adults talk to children. They're trying to charm performing interest, but the way you talk to someone who's thinking you actually respect, adjusting for vocabulary, but not for depth. He hadn't said anything about this to Elena. He wasn't sure he needed to. The audiologist, Dr. Phelps, was a compact, methodical woman in her 50s who had the reassuring quality of someone who had delivered many different kinds of news and had learned to let results be results without editorializing prematurely. She greeted Maisie by name, showed her the testing booth, a small, soundproofed room with a chair and a set of headphones and a window through which Cole could watch and explain the process simply. "You'll hear some tones through the headphones," she said. "Some will be loud, some will be quiet, some might be so quiet you're not sure if you heard them. Raise your hand if you think you heard something. Don't try to guess, just respond to what you actually hear." "What if I'm not sure?" Maisie asked. "Then trust yourself, doctor," Phelps said. "Your instinct about what you heard is almost always right." Maisie nodded. She went into the booth. Cole stood at the window. He had done things in his life that required a specific kind of courage, the kind that operated under fire, in darkness, in conditions designed to eliminate it. He had held people together while they were coming apart, had made decisions in seconds that he wouldn't have time to reconsider. He was not, by nature or training, a man who stood helplessly at windows. There was no door to go through, no enemy to locate, no action available to him at all, except watching his daughter sit in that chair in her school coat, with the headphones settling over her ears, her small hands flat on her knees, waiting. Elena came and stood beside him without speaking. A tone played. Couldn't hear it. The booth was soundproofed, but he saw Maisie's hand go up. Another tone. Her hand again, this time faster. Another. Pause. Her head tilted slightly. Then her hand, slower but definite. Dr. Phelps, seated at a console to the side, made notes. Her expression was professional and unreadable, the way professionals learn to hold their faces when the stakes are high for the person they're serving. Cole watched her and got nothing. He went back to watching Maisie. The test took 11 minutes. He knew, because he tracked it the same way he'd tracked the surgery, not deliberately, just the body counting what the mind couldn't hold. When it ended, Maisie took the headphones off and looked through the window at Cole. Her expression was the one he'd been trying to read since she was born, the one that was more complicated than her face had words for yet. Dr. Phelps opened the booth door. She brought Maisie out and sat her in the chair across from the main console and turned to Cole and Elena. She had a printed chart in her hand, the audiogram, the mapping of what Maisie's hearing had done. "I want to show you something," Dr. Phelps said. She laid the chart on the desk and pointed to the line that represented Maisie's results. From the test 6 weeks before the surgery, the baseline they'd been working from, the line that showed the steady downward trend. Then she pointed to the line from today's results. 2 lines were not the same. The left ear, the more significantly affected side, shows recovery across all tested frequencies, Dr. Phelps said. "We're seeing a return to near normal range in the mid and high frequencies, with mild residual loss in the very low range that we'll continue to monitor." She looked at Cole. "This is on the favorable end of Dr. Rowe's prognosis. The nerve repair has held, and the signal pathways are functioning." Cole looked at the chart. The 2 lines, before and after, the space between them representing something he didn't have a word for. That wasn't too small. "Her hearing," he said. "What's the practically, Doctor?" Phelps said Maisie should be able to hear conversation, music, environmental sound at near normal levels on the left side. She'll likely be able to discontinue the hearing aid. "We'll do a follow-up in 3 months to assess stability, and we'll want annual monitoring going forward. But what I'm seeing today is a successful outcome." She said it carefully, because she was a careful person. But she let it be what it was. Cole put his hand on the desk and leaned on it for a moment. Just a moment. Then he looked at Maisie, who had been sitting in the chair through all of this, with her hands in her lap, watching him. "Did you hear that?" he said. She looked at him. "I heard everything," she said. And then she was out of the chair, and he was crouching to catch her, and her arms were around his neck, and he held on with the fullness of 3 years of carrying the bills, the late nights, the audiologist appointments with their careful language, The long fear of a specific silence, and let it be over. He didn't cry. He was close. He was closer than he'd been in the hospital corridor, closer than he'd been in a long time. But he held it, the way he always held it, because some things he processed alone, and this was going to be one of them, later, in some quiet moment when Maisie was asleep and the apartment was still, and he could finally afford to put down what he'd been carrying. Maisie pulled back and looked at his face with the assessment she'd been applying to him her whole life. "You're doing the face," she said. "I'm not doing a face," he said. His voice was rough. "Dad, I'm not." She put both her small hands on his cheeks, the gesture he'd done to her 100 times, reversed and looked at him steadily. "It's okay," she said. "I'm okay." "I know," he said. "Are you okay?" He thought about it honestly. "Getting there," he said. She nodded, satisfied. She released his face and turned to Elena, who was standing near the door with her arms folded and her expression doing the thing it did when she was feeling something she hadn't prepared for. "We can go hear the whales now," Maisie said. "Right?" Dad promised. "He did," Elena said. Her voice was controlled. "He absolutely did." They went 2 weekends later. October had become November, properly cold, clear, the water off the Massachusetts coast the color of pewter in the flat morning light. The whale-watching boat out of Gloucester held about 60 passengers and smelled like diesel and salt, and the particular combination of things that meant open water. And Maisie stood at the bow railing for almost the entire 2-hour outbound journey, with the wind in her face and both ears uncovered. The hearing aid left at home for the first time, her coat zipped to the chin, and her expression one of focused, private attention. Cole stood beside her. Elena was slightly behind them, hands in her coat pockets, looking out at the water. The humpbacks found them, or they found the humpbacks. It was always unclear on these trips which version was more accurate, about 40 minutes from shore. 2 of them, a mother and a younger whale, surfacing in long rolling arcs about 50 yards off the port side. The boat slowed. The captain made an announcement. Around them, people moved to the railing, phones appearing. Crew member deployed the hydrophone, the underwater microphone the boat carried specifically for this, connected to a small speaker mounted near the bow. There was a moment of static water sound, the deep ambient noise of the ocean, doing what it did beneath the surface. And then the song came through. Low and strange and enormous, the kind of sound that seemed to arrive from multiple directions at once, because it was coming through water and air simultaneously, frequencies that the body felt before the ears registered them. Complex and hurried, complex and the humpback's call moved through the speaker with the quality of something that had been going on for longer than any of them had been alive, and would continue for longer than any of them would be. Maisie went very still. Cole watched her profile, the serious face, the eyes fixed on the water where the whales surfaced and dove, the slight parting of her lips that meant something was happening that she didn't have words for yet. Then her hand found his. He held it. The song continued. The whales moved unhurried, vast, indifferent to the boat and its passengers, and the small human drama happening at the bow railing, present in their own enormous way, doing the thing they'd always done. Cole felt Maisie's grip tighten. He looked down. She was crying. Not dramatically, not the way a younger child cries, with sound and effort, but the silent kind, tears moving down her face while her expression stayed still. The kind of crying that happens when something is too large for the body to contain quietly, and the eyes solve the problem without the rest of the face being consulted. "Maisie," he said. She shook her head. Not just wait. She needed a minute. He waited. After a moment, she turned her face up toward him. "I can hear them," she said. Her voice was almost a whisper, almost steady. "I can actually hear them." He crouched down to her level. Her face was wet, and her eyes were very bright, and she looked, he thought, in the specific private catalog he kept of the images of his daughter that he would carry for the rest of his life, like exactly herself. The full version. The version that was supposed to exist. "I know," he said. She stopped. "Try it again." "Can't." "You don't have to," he said. She looked at the water. The whales surfaced again, closer this time, the sound of their breath enormous and brief and real. "This is what you promised," she said. "Yeah, you kept it." "I always try to," he said. She leaned into him, and he put his arm around her, and they stood like that at the bow of the boat, while the song moved through the speaker, and the whales moved through the water, and the November came down flat and clean on everything. Behind them, Elena said nothing. She had moved to stand slightly apart, giving them the moment, which was the right instinct, and which Cole noted without turning around. After a while, Maisie straightened up, wiped her face with her coat sleeve, practical about it. Looked at the whales. Then she turned around. "Elena," she said. Elena looked up. "Come here," Maisie said. It wasn't a request exactly. It was the tone she used when she decided something, and was simply informing the relevant parties. "You should hear it from here. It's better." Elena came and stood at the railing on Maisie's other side. Maisie took her hand without ceremony, the way she'd taken Cole's, and turned back to the water. The three of them stood at the bow of the boat. The song went on. Victor Dane went to trial 11 months after his removal from Whitlock Medical Technologies. Cole was not required to testify the financial evidence, and Rebecca's testimony were sufficient, and Patricia managed the evidentiary side without needing him on the stand. He followed the case through Patricia's updates and occasional news coverage, the way you follow something that was once urgent and has become history. The verdict came on a Thursday afternoon. Victor and the three board members, who had knowingly participated, Harrison, Pack, and Drummond, whose abstention had apparently been his final attempt at an exit strategy that didn't work, were convicted on counts of securities fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. Harrison and Pack received sentences that included prison time. Drummond, who had cooperated more fully with investigators, received a suspended sentence and a substantial fine. Victor received 4 years. Rebecca Sloan cooperated throughout the investigation and was not charged. She resigned from Whitlock Medical Technologies and, as Cole understood it from Elena, who heard through the legal grapevine, had taken a position with a nonprofit legal organization. Caitlin, her daughter, had entered a treatment program for gambling addiction. Rebecca had told Patricia, in one of their final meetings, that the hardest part wasn't the trial. It was the conversation with her daughter, that it had gone better than she'd expected. That Caitlin had said she already knew something was wrong and had been waiting for her mother to talk to her about it. Elena had heard this and been quiet for a moment and then said, "Things have a way of coming out eventually. The only question is whether you get to choose how." The diagnostic flaw in the AI system was corrected by the engineering team within 3 months of Victor's removal. The correction was documented, submitted to the FDA, and incorporated into the clinical trial protocol. The first patient cohort began the following spring, on schedule, with accurate technology. Cole read about the trial launch in a medical journal. He read it in his office. The Whitlock Barrett Foundation for Pediatric Medical Access occupied a suite of rooms in a building in Brookline, not the seaport, not glass and clean lines, but an older building with good light and reasonable rent, and a landlord who had been moved by Elena's explanation of what the foundation intended to do and had given them a favorable rate, which Elena had accepted without embarrassment. Because she'd learned in building her first company that refusing help because of pride was a luxury nobody building something real could afford. Cole's office was small. It had a desk and 2 chairs for families, and a window that looked onto a courtyard where a maple tree was losing its leaves in the November wind. He'd put Maisie's anglerfish drawing on the wall. She'd given it to him formally, a presentation with some ceremony, telling him it was for his office because offices needed art, and also because the anglerfish was a symbol of finding light in the dark, which she'd read somewhere and decided was relevant. He'd hung it at eye level. He looked at it sometimes between appointments. The work was not glamorous. It was phone calls with insurance companies and conversations with trial program administrators and meetings with families who arrived frightened and overwhelmed and needed someone to help them navigate a system that was not designed to be navigated easily. It was paperwork and advocacy and the particular patience of a person who had been on both sides of this, who had been the professional behind the desk and the desperate parent in the chair and understood what each position required. He was good at it, not effortlessly. He made mistakes, misjudged a case's eligibility, and had to deliver disappointing news, got into an argument with an insurance company's appeals department that he handled with less composure than he'd have preferred, structured one early intake process in a way that Elena had told him would create liability problems, and that had, in fact, created liability problems. He learned from these things. He kept going. Elena ran the foundation's administrative and development work from her own office 3 doors down. They had 4 full-time staff. They had a board of their own, deliberately small, people Elena had chosen for competence over prestige. They argued regularly about strategy, and they had, over the course of the foundation's first year, arrived at a working method that preserved both of their instincts without either of them having to suppress what they were. It was not always easy. Elena was demanding, and she expected the same standard from him that she held herself to, which was extremely high, and some days that produced friction. Cole had his own stubbornness, his own blind spots, his own tendency to carry things alone longer than was useful. They had fights not dramatic, but real, the kind that come from two people who both care about something and disagree about how to protect it. They got through them the way you get through things imperfectly, with some repair work required on the other side. They had also, somewhere in the accumulated ordinary of it, all the boat trips and the kitchen table mornings and the long evenings going over case files become something neither of them had entirely planned on. Cole hadn't known how to name it for a while. He hadn't tried particularly hard, because naming things was a way of putting pressure on them, and what was happening between them had been growing at its own pace, and he'd been disinclined to interfere. But there was a night in January, about 3 months after the whale-watching trip, when they'd been working late at the foundation and had ended up at a diner 2 blocks away that was open until midnight, and over coffee and eggs that were mediocre in ways they both commented on extensively. Elena had said something about her childhood, about her father, a difficult man who'd loved her in the particular way of people who don't know how to say so, which meant mostly through criticism, and it was the first time she'd told him something that wasn't about work or Maisie or the logistics of the world they were building together. It was just a thing that had happened to her, offered without purpose. The way you offer things to someone when you've decided they're the kind of person worth offering them to. He'd listened. And then he'd told her something back about his time in the Navy, a specific thing, a night in a place he rarely talked about, the kind of story that had weight and edges, and was not a good story in any conventional sense, but was true. She'd listened to the whole thing. When he finished, she hadn't said anything reassuring. He'd said, "That must have been very hard to carry." Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "That's awful." Just the simple acknowledgement of the weight of it, which was the right thing, the only useful thing, and the thing most people got wrong. He'd looked at her across the diner table and understood that he was in something he couldn't call anything other than what it was. He hadn't said it then. He'd said it later. On a Sunday in March, in the kitchen of the apartment he'd been in for 3 years, while Maisie was at a friend's house and the afternoon was quiet around them, and Elena had been reading something at the kitchen table with her glasses on, which she only wore when she was alone or with people she'd stopped performing for, and the light was coming through the window the way it does in March, when the season is thinking about changing. He'd said it simply, because simple was the only honest register for something that large. She'd taken her glasses off and looked at him. Then she'd said, "I know. I've known for a while." And he'd said, "And I'm here," she said. "Aren't I?" He'd thought about that for a moment, about the difference between the words you say and the actions that say the same thing with more authority, about all the mornings she'd shown up, all the cases she'd stayed late for, all the times Maisie had taken her hand without asking. "Yeah," he said. "You are Maisie Barrett turned 8 in April." She requested a whale-themed party, which was not a surprise, and a cake shaped like an anglerfish, which required Elena to find a bakery willing to attempt it, which she did, because she was Elena, and when she decided something was going to happen, it happened. The cake was technically more abstract than representational, but Maisie declared it perfect, and ate 2 slices and gave a third to Mrs. Paulson, who had been invited and who cried a little when she arrived, which she attributed to allergies and which nobody challenged. There were 7 kids from Maisie's class, 3 of whom were afraid of the anglerfish cake and 5 of whom were fascinated by it, and it was a good party in the chaotic, slightly too loud, somebody spilled juice way that good children's parties are. Later that evening, after the guests had gone and the apartment had been imperfectly cleaned and Maisie was in her room with new books she'd requested, Cole and Elena sat on the couch with the lights low and the apartment finally quiet. "She asked me something this week," Elena said. Cole looked at her. "She asked me," Elena paused, chose the words. "She asked if I was going to keep living in my apartment or if I was going to live here." She looked at her hands. She said she was asking because she wanted to know how to think about things. Cole was quiet. "What did you tell her?" he asked. "Told her I wasn't sure yet," Elena said, "but that I wasn't going anywhere." She looked at him. She said that was an acceptable answer, but she'd need an update. He almost smiled. "That sounds right," she also said. Elena stopped again. Something moved across her face that she was deciding whether to say. "Tell me," he said. She said she thought we should be a family, that we already were one mostly, and it would be better to make it official. Elena's voice was steady but not effortlessly. She said she'd looked up adoption, and she thought it might be complicated, but that complicated things were worth doing if they mattered. Cole looked at the woman beside him on the couch, precise and unsentimental, and here, consistently and entirely here, in the way that mattered more than anything he could have asked for. "She's not wrong," he said. Elena looked at him. "About which part?" "Any of it," he said. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she exhaled a real breath, the kind that releases something, and leaned back against the couch. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. From down the hall came the sound of Maisie talking to herself over a new book, the low, ongoing narration she made while reading things that interested her. It had been the soundtrack of his life for 7 years, so familiar that he stopped registering it most of the time, the way you stop registering the sounds that have always been there. But tonight, he registered it. He sat in the quiet and listened to his daughter's voice, coming down the hallway, moving through the apartment, the way sound moves through water present everywhere at once, traveling further than you expect, arriving in places it was never directed toward. He thought about what strength had meant to him across the different versions of his life. What he'd believed it was at 22 in training, where it was physical and definable and had a score attached to it. What he'd thought it was at 30 in the field, where it was endurance and the capacity to keep functioning past the point where functioning stopped feeling possible. What he'd thought it was at 34, when his career was gone and he had a daughter with a diagnosis and a bar job and a set of skills that were useless for the specific problem in front of him. He'd been wrong about it, each time. Or not wrong exactly, those things were real but incomplete. The version he understood now was harder to describe. It wasn't something you could measure or demonstrate. It had to do with showing up when showing up was the only option. It had to do with not flinching from the things that frightened you most, even when flinching would have been easier. It had to do with being willing to need help and being willing to offer it, and understanding that those two things were not as different as they'd seemed when he was younger. And it had to do with this, with what was in this apartment tonight, with Maisie's voice down the hall, with the woman beside him who had walked through a rainstorm into a bar and told the truth to a stranger because she had nothing left to lose by honesty. With a foundation 3 miles away, where tomorrow morning there would be families arriving with problems that had solutions, if someone was willing to help them find the path. He'd spent 3 years believing that all the training in the world meant nothing if you couldn't save your own child. He'd been wrong about that too. What the training had given him was not the ability to solve every problem. It was the ability to stay present in the ones he couldn't solve and keep working the ones he could. It was the discipline to distinguish between those two categories when everything in him wanted to refuse the distinction. Fatherhood had given him something the training never addressed, the specific vulnerability of loving something more than your own continuity. The thing that made certain moments cost everything and certain moments worth everything, sometimes at the same time. And what Maisie and Elena had given him was the thing he hadn't known he'd stopped believing in, somewhere in the long, difficult years between the Navy and now, that the life you build after the worst thing can be bigger than the life you had before it. Not better in the sense of easier, bigger in the sense of more honest, more chosen, more genuinely yours. He'd believed for a long time that survival was the thing. That if he could just keep standing, keep working, keep Maisie safe and fed and moving forward, that would be enough. That was the mission. Keep her alive and whole and get to the next day. But survival wasn't the thing. Survival was the beginning of the thing. What came after was the part that mattered, the actual living, the choosing, the building of something, not because you had to, but because you decided to. Because after the danger ended and the enemy was gone, and the crisis had resolved itself into ordinary days, you still woke up in the morning, and you still had to decide what to do with the hours. He had decided. Down the hall, Maisie's voice paused. Then she called out, "Dad, did you know some whales can live for over 100 years? "I didn't know that," he called back. A pause. "They just swim around for 100 years. "That's a long time," he said. "I think it sounds nice, actually," she said. Then the narration resumed, quiet and continuous, traveling through the walls of the apartment the way her voice always did, present, and real, and entirely ordinary, the most extraordinary ordinary sound in his world. Elena reached over and took his hand. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. Outside, the city moved through its evening rhythms, headlights, and wind, and the distant sound of the harbor, the water doing what it always did, patient and permanent, and carrying everything that came to it without condition. And in a small apartment in Boston, with a whale-shaped birthday balloon slowly losing its air in the kitchen corner, and an anglerfish drawing on the wall, and a cold cup of coffee on the table, and the specific mess of a life actually being lived all around them. Cole Barrett sat in the quiet and understood, for the first time in longer than he could accurately remember, that he was not waiting for anything. He was already home.